I'm Trey. Sorry. I think that was my fault.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Take your seats, please. Guys, come on up. Watch the cables.
Yes, sir.
Watch the cables. Okay. You just use the arrows.
Okay, can we
Advance.
see if it works now? Can you do one and then go back?
Amen. Ah, famous last words. There we go. Okay, now we're good.
Yeah,
Okay?
thank you.
All right, folks, up next, Lessons Learned, a pedagogical approach to teaching motorsport history by Quinn, Beekwilder, and Trey Cunningham. Gentlemen?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I teach a 1 o'clock Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoon class, and so I understand the challenges of coming back and talking to a group of people after lunch. So we greatly appreciate your attention. My name is Trey Cunningham. I am the chair of Sport and Motorsport Management at Belmont Abbey College. This is my colleague, Quinn Beekwilder. He's our program coordinator for Motorsport Management. Quinn is actually an alum of our program and has spent 10 years at Charlotte Motor Speedway working through many ranks, and then we finally got him back. So let's get started. One thing that I would like to mention right off the start is that this might seem like a little bit of a self-serving presentation to tell you about our program. However, please note that we truly are here to learn from you, and as we learn and grow and develop our program, we feel like this group of people can help us bring our program to the next level. So a little bit about Belmont Abbey. We are a liberal arts Benedictine Catholic college right outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. We have a Bachelor's of Arts degree in motorsport management. We currently have 40 students that are with us on campus for this program. In the fall, we are starting pending SAC COC approval. If the academics in here know what I'm talking about, our commission, our accrediting commission. We are starting an online MBA with a concentration in motorsport management. Our program specifically focuses on business management, communications, marketing, financial, and operation sides of motorsport industry. We do have a little bit of a history as well. One of our, we say our founding fathers of the program is super promoter Humpy Wheeler. His father has been associated with the school for a very long time, was a coach and athletic director at Belmont Abbey. The first course was called Racing Management in 2007, so we have been teaching classes for a little over 15 years revolving around the business side of racing. We really got a nice break in promotion when the Wall Street Journal published an article. It was referred to as the Grease Monks. Once again, we're a Benedictine college, and it's owned by Benedictine monks. And that was published in October 2007, and so that gave us a lot of nice publicity to the start of the program. We have several guiding principles, and I'm going to start with the middle one first, and that is to create and maintain a deep integration and connection with the motorsport industry. Obviously, we are located in Greater Charlotte. We consider Charlotte a great location and center for motorsports here in the United States and maybe even globally. And so we are continuously out trying to build and create these connections with the industry, much like the reason that we're here in Watkins Glen. The next one would be provide a sustainable experiential learning and networking opportunities for our students. We believe this is very important for them to get their foot in the door and have wonderful experiences, network with industry professionals, and learn from that standpoint. We require our students to do internships, and most of them do multiple internships at multiple locations in the Charlotte area or back home. And then lastly, we feel that it's deeply important to develop the entire student, right? It's guided by our faith as a Catholic college, and then obviously some of the Benedictine hallmarks of stewardship, community, and discipline. And this is where the history portion of the program comes in, is that we believe that the students should learn the history of the motorsport industry so that they are able to be good stewards as that is being handed over, the industry has been handing over to them as well. So these are our guiding principles, and Mr. Beekwilder will now talk to you a little bit about the actual classes that we have related to history.
All right, thank you very much. So really, I chose this quote here by Burt McIntosh, who was originally a photographer and early magazine producer in the early 1900s. The comment, talks about a big, far-reaching sport that was just developing, and he knew it was going to be a constant source of delight, satisfaction, and pride to us all. And he was witnessing at the time the speed trials being held at Ormond Beach. And this is, kind of where it began. So how do we cover a sport that started in 1894 in 16 weeks? It's going to be tricky. So as I usually tell my students, buckle up. So we cover many different aspects of motorsports. I try to give an entire approach from the start all the way through up to last weekend's race. So really, I reach far back. I talk about the Gordon Bennett Cup, whose equivalent prize money would be around $2.3 million for winning. An absolutely astounding amount of money. The first time that motorsports was really threatened to even, to be canceled, if you will. The Paris-Madrid race of 1903. You had 224 cars that entered. Within the first 350 miles, half the field was out, and unfortunately 8 people were dead. The government of France steps in, stops the whole event, never even makes it to Spain. And it would be nearly 24 years, almost a quarter of a century, before the public road racing would come back again. The Mille Miglia would kind of picked up that torch. Italy kind of gets its rise to fame. A 1,000-mile race that saw the rise of Ferrari to greats like Nuvolari. The Targa Florio down in Sicily, having off and on running from 1906 all the way through 1977. Monaco, trying to entice people to come and visit this small little nation at the bottom of France. And the Germans not to be outdone, creating the Nürburgring, which you can still go for about $20 and drive on yourself today. So these are the first great spectacles we talk about. But there are plenty of people that are involved in this. And so we move on to the drivers. But there are so many drivers out there. Who do we cover? Just a brief smitten of who we cover. Tazio Nuvolari, who I mentioned previously, with his impossible victory, with his underpowered Alfa Romeo versus the Germans in the 30s, and also a never quit attitude. I mean, the story goes that he was qualifying for a race on motorcycles. He broke both his legs in qualifying, and the next day he had his mechanic strap him to the bike, and he went on to win the darn thing. I mean, that's a never quit attitude. Juan Manuel Fangio, at the early day onset as first five-time champ really of F1 racing. And still has the winningest percentage of an F1 driver. A.J. Foyt, an American driver, the only one to have ever won the Indy and Daytona 500s, Daytona and Le Mans 24 hours, and Sebring 12 hours. Mario Andretti goes from racing in dirt tracks in Pennsylvania to USAC to F1 championships, and then all the way to Pikes Peak. Louise Smith, the first lady of racing. The story goes that she was at the beach race in '48 and was raced the family car and flipped the darn thing. Would go on to win multiple events in different formats. Michael Schumacher, the first 7-time champ. Ayrton Senna, need I say more? And Lewis Hamilton, who still to this day has a 62% chance to podium every time he gets on to start. Even the other 7-time champ only had about a 50% chance to podium. So these are a sampling of the drivers that we try to cover more in depth, obviously. But what I really also try to kind of point out is the event in Le Mans. Now, they're coming up on their 100th anniversary. As far the racing is not for 100 years, is interrupted by 2 world wars, but their 100th anniversary is coming up. There have been so many books and competitions that have kind of like between Ferrari, famously Ferrari and Ford, and Audi versus everyone. And then also multiple movies have been made, books have come out. There's something enduring about that ultimate question of how far you can go in 24 hours. But it's also really important to touch on the fact that motorsports almost died again in the 55 Le Mans race. And I really try to bring that to the students' attention, where Hawthorne driving his Jaguar pitted late, and unfortunately LeVay driving a Mercedes was launched into the crowd and killing 83 plus people. But the craziest part is the race continues. It was only 35 minutes into a 24-hour race, and it kept going. They're literally dealing with the folks there, and the racing still goes. Mercedes would eventually pull out at 2 a.m. and not return to motorsports until 1987. But these are the types of influential things that happened in one event. I mean, Switzerland still doesn't allow motorsport events because of this event. And so, it's a really big, important event. But these tracks, these places that kind of have these hollow ground type, aspirations, also kind of what next is we go into tracks themselves. If we say things like Watkins Glen, Sebring, Circuit de la Sauve, Brooklands, Monaco, just the words and names themselves kind of conjure up images. But what is it about these places? Is it the surface they actually race on? Oswego even. Is it the asphalt, the dirt? Is it the banking, the chicanes, the apexes? What makes them so special? Why do people keep returning to them? Why do whole families and generations of people kind of follow through and always attend the same events year after year? There's got to be something special about them. And even places like Darlington. But that kind of rolls into what we teach and also as NASCAR, a third-rate joyride for the working class, as it originally referred to, kind of by the AAA. So, how do you condense all of NASCAR's history into just a few presentations? Well, I try to break it down in three key modules, I feel as. There's the 1936 to 49, where you really have the first family of racing, the Flocks, three brothers and a sister who would go on to compete and be the only family of four, really, or four siblings that actually competed on the same track. Their sister won, by the way. Would go on. World War II would intercede. There's so many, so much technology as far as training and such, kind of came out of that for the mechanics that would come back from the war and use their skills to improve the vehicles that they raced in. The first national champion stock car circuit, Bill France's kind of proof of concept, run in 1947, that was originally then brought to the streamline to say, hey, I can pay out the money, I can run the races, I can do the insurance. Let's go ahead and form this next thing that we're going to call NASCAR. And then the next big iteration, 1950 to 71, little Darlington, South Carolina, getting a super speedway. 1950, the first track is super speedway is built in NASCAR, and it's a funny little shape if you ever really see it. And the reason because there was a minnow pond on a corner that they sort of shifted the track to because the landowner didn't want to ruin his minnow pond. And also the guy who eventually won the race, because NASCAR had never done a 500-mile race. 50 miles, 100 miles, that was their bread and butter. But it was a guy who'd competed at Indy and used truck tires to actually beat them all out. Carl Kiekhaefer, the first Rick Hendrick, bring matching uniforms, painted up trucks. He owned Mercury Outboard Motors. He's the first one to bring in an African-American driver into his team as well. We talk about the big three leaving. Basically, 1955 was starting to get a little rocky for big companies being involved in motorsports and unfortunately fans perishing. And then a race in West Virginia, or in Martinsville, actually kind of another 2 or 3 fans died, and then the big three kind of stepped out of the way. And so that was a big gaping hole. We talk about the second family of racing, the Lees, and how Winston cigarettes, how they lose TV advertising, but they got NASCAR, and then so that was a big change to our sport as well. 1972 to present was that last kind of big block of time where a blizzard brings NASCAR to the masses. Lights, under one hot night, all of a sudden go night racing. Professionalism in the pit crew with the Rainbow Warriors. Of course, Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s death, Jimmy 7-time, and development of the Cup car, NASCAR media, and the Frances. These are some of the things we touch on to kind of cover the history. We go a little bit more in depth with NASCAR because that's kind of where we're at. We do also cover open wheel racing in our class. We mainly focus on the first Indy 500 and really the splits between the AAA leaving, USAC forming, CART and USAC, CART IRL, Champ Car World Series, and then finally reunification in the IndyCar series as is today. We also try to ask the question, if they had stayed together throughout that entire time period, would they be more popular and kept a consistent fan base to be more popular than NASCAR is today? Or, because of all these splits and disunification, did that give NASCAR a chance to rise up and kind of beat them out at their own game? For attention, that is. We also cover the NHRA, so kind of all the impetus of what's happening on the West Coast, everything that kind of happened on the East Coast we just previously talked about, but really it was the all this talent coming back from the wars, guys who had worked on planes and tanks and trucks, were now tinkering with old cars and making them go faster. Southern California Timing Associations formed around 1948. They hold their first land speed trials out in the Bonneville Salt Flats. C.J. Pappy Hart takes a spare side runway and creates the Santa Ana Drags. Wally Park sees all this. He had been involved with time trials, creates the NHRA, and they go racing. They had their first event in Pomona in '53, and then they have their championship in the middle of everywhere, trying it in Great Bend, Kansas by '55. The safety safari, spreading this gospel of speed across the entire country. When all these places wanted to have that badge of NHRA and drag racing, they traveled to these locations and made sure that they qualified for the insurance coverages, and made sure that things were safe. And of course, Darren Garlett and his funky rear engine, who would have thought about that? I think he was tired of losing feet. So that's the type of history that we cover in our class in 16 weeks. I'm going to turn it a little bit over to Dr. Cunningham again.
That was a lot. I don't think I could pass that final exam. So you can tell the depth that Quinn does a wonderful job teaching these undergraduate students with this MM 200 class. So really the next question and the reason that we're here is, how do we reinforce these historical concepts throughout the rest of the entire curriculum? And so we wanted to go from instructivism to constructivism through several different methods, right? We use case studies. One of our adjunct instructors is Vice President of Communications and Marketing for Roush Fenway Keselowski, and he was there during the Ryan Newman incident. And so Kevin brings some of those experiences back into the classroom and then also compares that to other historical events such as Ryan Newman's wreck several years ago. We also bring in, we rely very heavily on guest speakers. Many of the times that they have topics related to history. Another one of our adjuncts is Matt Yoakum. He teaches our sport broadcasting class, and he brings in Pam Miller, Daryl Waltrip, a lot of very well-known names who come in and talk about the importance of the motorsport history. Running a little short of time here, but we also do reflection papers and presentations that reflect back on where we are now, where we are, what they have seen today in today's society in tracks, and how it was in the past. Before COVID, we did a little bit of travel. We did a little of engaging of the senses, as I like to say, being there at the track, understanding what is taking place in the media center, many of those types of things. We did some networking, and we also tried to teach the students how important it was that they are needing to be able to adapt to change. However, during COVID, Quinn and I wouldn't say we were bored, but we were very anxious to move our program forward. And we came up with some ideas to go from a motorsport program 1.0 to motorsport program 2.0. And so we wanted to find a way to bring the history to life. And we kind of wrote down some challenges. One was we wanted the students to recognize what makes something a spectacle or entertaining so that people will spend money within the industry. We wanted to find ways to network with influencers outside of our normal bubble of Charlotte. We wanted the students to experience the endurance, the physical endurance, and the flexibility that is required to be a part of a weekend race. Observe tracks during the operations, and most importantly, we wanted them to see the history that we've taught them in the past. That we wanted them to contrast that with business models, how business models have evolved over time, so that they're aware, they're the ones that are evolving future business models in their career. So here's the plan that we came up with.
So I approached Trey toward the end of 21 saying we need to go to more races. And so I told him my idea for 1 to 2 races, and he said, you know what, let's make a class out of it. So we created MM390 Professional Development in Motorsport. We picked several events that we thought that were not as fully packed or as attended as other events would be. If we go to the Daytona 500, FaceTime with executives or people actually who kind of would matter for their networking career for our students would be unavailable. But places like the 24-hour of a Rolex at Daytona, there's a lot more flexibility. Same thing with like the Indy race at Texas Motor Speedway and even the 4-wide nationals at ZMAX Dragway. And so that's what we did. We traveled. We created a class. We took 10 students, put them in vans, and we drove down to Florida. So we drove down to Florida, and we got to experience, we met with George Levy, who runs the Motorsport Hall of Fame of America. Got a fantastic tour from him. And then we mentioned that we were actually going to the North Turn Grill. And he said, you know what, I know someone who's doing a fantastic radio show called Legends of Racing by Buzz McKim, and said, why don't you guys head on down there and check it out? And the next day, there we were. It was a fantastic show, Buzz. And while we were there and learning about that, they told us that there was still a portion of the old A1A that was still part of the original original beach and road course that you kind of can see there. And we traveled down there. I did lose into a foot race with my students, but that's okay. And so we went to the Streamline Hotel where NASCAR was founded, and it's really, just noticing and really living and experiencing that history that they had taught about and been read about and took a test on, but we're now actually seeing it physically and in person. We also were able to connect with a lot of industry leaders from Tom Doonan to Kevin Kennedy with Ford Performance Marketing, some of our own grads who are in NASCAR actually, and Haley Deegan, we got hot laps with her, and because it was kind of a less attended event, students actually got to interview her for a student project. Got invited in the garage from GMG Racing, saw the entire Jackson Marketing runs all the Michelin tires and wheels with Scott Taylor. He showed us around, and so the whole back end of like what goes on for the races. And it was just really kind of that in-depth field, the different fields they can go into, the different positions they could have, the different experiences they can go with. Then we also went out to Texas Motor Speedway. It was a very long drive, but a very fulfilling drive. We stopped by Talladega Speedway at the McCaig-Wilborn Research Library and also the International Motorsport Hall of Fame. Saw a vast collection that was out there, and one of the more NASCAR things we saw, there were 2 urns right by the right-hand side of that sign, just sort of left out there. It's a very NASCAR thing to do. And once we got to Texas itself, Ron Ramage was able to kind of give us the keys to the kingdom. He was the president of the track at the time, and we met with all his top-level executives who run, from marketing to PR to track operations, and basically experienced a phenomenal weekend. And I'll turn it over to Trey to wrap things up here.
So we learned a lot. And we were very tired after the spring as well. But we're still in the process of developing, really fleshing out this more about what actually was learned, right? One is we learned that the more flexible that we were, it ended up creating more learning opportunities. We had meetings set up at specific times throughout the specific events, and all of a sudden we'd get a text or a phone call saying, hey, I was supposed to meet you at 9 a.m., but I'm not available till 11:30. Okay, so what do we do? How do we move 10 people around the pits? We needed to be very flexible. The students need to learn that because that's real life experience. We also realized that professionalism is now a priority. The first couple of events that we went to, students showed up in their what they refer to as their vintage Mark Martin shirts. And we then decided we're going to get all the students polos and jackets, and we're going to try to at least buy them some professionalism, buy them some confidence along the way. So when we showed up places, we looked a little bit like we belong there. We might not have, but so we're really instilling that professionalism within our students from day one. We totally reinvigorated our alumni. We had alumni that started seeing things on social media. Alumni we didn't even know we had. They came out of the woodworks and have been very supportive. For example, Mike LaHada is the vice president of corporate sales at NASCAR in Daytona. He actually took time away from his day and gave us a personal tour of that area around the NASCAR building. We realized how important it was that building a family and a team atmosphere was, in cohesion. These students are going to be spending the rest of their lives in the industry, and no better networking and connection than their own classmates that they set 12 hours in a van with. We also realized that we needed to stop doing things with juniors and seniors and start focusing on the freshmen and sophomore. And so what we've been able to do is align all classes from the very first day that a student enters on campus to the day that they graduate. They all work and move together in many of those activities. And most importantly, the thing that we thought was going to be the most difficult actually became the easiest, and that was that industry professionals were more than willing to give their time, to give back, to give advice, to be flexible themselves. And it was quite the blessing in those events. We have a lot of other great things planned. Quinn and I truly believe that there's someone or several of you in this room that will help us bring our program to the next level. So we look forward over the next 2 days to speak to many of you, to hear your ideas on how we can move this forward. All right, that's the end of our presentation. Do we have any time for questions?
Yes, I think I left the microphone. Yes, thank you. All right, thank you. Any questions? Yes, okay, coming back to you.
So a quick question.
Yep.
How useful have you found the NASCAR Hall of Fame into helping you in your program?
Oh, absolutely. The NASCAR Hall of Fame is in Charlotte. We take multiple trips there a year. One of the class that Quinn teaches, the MM200 History, Culture, and Philosophy of Sport, there's an annual trip for all of those students in the spring. And there's a lot of events that take place. I think just last week the NASCAR championships were held at the Hall of Fame. Dale Jr. was there to present the award. The students were there, got the pictures with them. It was a great event. So we do utilize the NASCAR Hall of Fame, we're super blessed to have it so close. We utilize it as much as we possibly can.
I have a quick question about the buy-in from your colleagues at the university. How hard a sell was this when you approached the university administration and said, we want to do a motorsports degree? It seems like, I know the institution where I teach, it would be them's fighting words to try and come up with that kind of a program. But I'm just curious as to how smoothly things went for you folks.
Yeah, super smooth. Once again, Humpy Wheeler was on our board of directors and 15 years ago and introduced that concept to our president, Dr. Thierfelder. Our entire administration is fully aligned and gives us, our administration doesn't know about a lot of this stuff, to be honest with you, right? But what a blessing. We don't, they trust that we're going to do what's right for the students, and that overall, that as long as we're developing the whole student beyond just what's in the classroom, then we don't really have much kickback. And our provost was the former sport and motorsport management chair like myself. So we have a full support from top to bottom.
I was just going to say, I wish this program had existed 50-some years ago. I used to have to cut classes to go to races. And now I could actually take it as a curriculum. Where were you guys back then?
Yeah, they do still cut classes. Every once in a while, I'll have to call a professor that's kind of questioning why they're missing so much. And I'll say, this is super important. This young lady's about to go meet Lynn St. James at the Women with Drive conference a couple of weeks ago. And I promise you, this could change the trajectory of her career. Could you please let her take that exam at another time?
Just another quick one. What's the future you're laying out? I know that you've got a good groundwork. I'm very impressed, to be very honest about it. So what you're laying the groundwork in, and where you're going to be going in the future, the expansions?
I think what we're focusing on for the future is really kind of that re-engagement of the alumni. That we have a lot of success stories who are out there in industry already. I think there was a lack of reaching out to the alumni earlier, and so just re-engagement of them, kind of bringing them back in the program, and a focus more on that team building aspect, so that once you graduate, those juniors, sophomores, and freshmen can reach out to you and then say, "Hey, I'd really like to come shadow you. I'd like to, see what that experience is like," and create, just a cycle of kind of, rinse and repeat, if you will. Really, emphasizing these early spring classes where we go on the trips. It was really important to us to establish those networks and try to grow them, and then just kind of solidify the foundation we're at, and kind of keep growing from there. And the numbers are showing it, so, which is good.
Our MBA with a concentration
Yeah,
in
that's
motorsports
it.
will be fully online. So we're looking to expand with instructors fully online, remote instructors as well as remote students as
Yeah.
well. We'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
Do you have any involvement with the mechanical and restoration aspects, or do you leave that to other institutions?
Yeah, UNC Charlotte is right in our backyard, and they have a phenomenal engineering program. That's something that we're kind of not set up for. We don't have the facilities at all to teach engineering or to, turn wrenches. We would like to, but, it's really, we're more focused on the soft skills rather than the hands-on skills. Although our students do have their own Lemons team that they run themselves. So, whether the car makes it there or not is totally up to them.
So you said you covered open wheel and circle track and a couple different asphalt cars,
Yeah.
but you didn't say anything about dirt. Why don't you cover that, and do you think that limits your students?
Yeah, we do actually have a handful of actual people who race dirt themselves who come through our program. I did have to cut a little bit of my presentation short for time-wise. We do cover, the World of Outlaws is right in our backyard. The finals are this weekend, being run at Charlotte. And, we do love dirt too. But, as far as, kind of coming up northeast, that is definitely something that we can start including into, like talking about Oswego and Eldora. That's why it's difficult to cover motorsport history as a whole. You can have an entire semester dedicated to dirt and its various formats and racing. So it's not that we don't like dirt. We love dirt. I love taking Q-tip and getting that mud out of my ears after an event. But it's just something that we do briefly cover.
Well, it sounds like initially the program was more based on the management side, but you're starting to delve more into exploring the history of racing. And I was curious, as far as job placement, is there do you have any type of figures as far as job placement, like what percentage of your graduates wind up landing positions in NASCAR, or if they're finding positions in other types of motorsports? And then finally, what are maybe one or two of the types of jobs that they're being hired to do? Because you mentioned UNC Charlotte, they have the technical school, the engineering school. You mentioned Mike Lahetta, great guy, 1 year alumni, because I believe he was at the NASCAR Hall of Fame before he went over to NASCAR. Are there more stories like Mike? Can you provide some more examples of the types of jobs and the amount of placement, percentage of placement you've had with the program?
Yeah. So when I was digging into the alumni, we did a alumni mixer and networking event last year as part of this professional development program the students put together. And basically combing through all the records and trying to figure out everyone through their LinkedIn pages and just trying to reach out and contact them. We have roughly over 100 graduates or so in that time span, and about half are actually had made it to the industry, or were still in the industry, I should say. About 3/4 made it to the industry. Some spent a year or two, 3 years or so, then moved on to another job. But the majority seem to are still enjoying themselves. We've had graduates, the ones is one of the head managers at Victory Karting, which is a local karting establishment, and keeps that ongoing. We have other grads, Ian Moy, who's now over Penske's social media. He was Ryan Blaney's PR rep for multiple years, but he started out as an advisor at Belmont. A job hadn't opened up right then, but he stuck with it. He kind of persevered through. Others, Jordan Anderson is also one of our grads. So he came from a dirt and late model type experience all the way through to now owning his own team. We have Morgan Overstreet was Chase Elliott's rep. She's now with Dirty Mo Media. Several folks over at Junior Motorsports as well. A lot of PR reps, a lot of social media reps, and actually the marketing director for Hoosier Tires is one of our grads. Taylor Hole, a professional drift racer, was one of our grads back in the day. And then also A lot have ended up at Charlotte, myself included. You know, I spent 10 years there. Tom Vesey, who's in charge of operations, is also there. A gal down in PRN kind of runs their boards. So it's a wide variety of grads all over the industry, but mostly on the soft skill sides.
Hi, you mentioned 40 students in the program currently. What are you hoping to get, and how do the students find you? How do you promote the program? Because this is obviously a very unique niche.
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question. You know, because it is so unique, it's hard to kind of go to Google Analytics and select college student motorsport management, let me spend my money. So in that respect, it's a lot of word of mouth. We're starting to find out that a lot more folks, and kind of like myself, originally I came from California, I had no contacts in the industry, heard about this program. You required at the time, 3 internships, and then, you know, you had these connections, and like, hey, I want to get into this industry that's very small and tight-knit. They have connections, that's probably how I should spend my money. And that is kind of a recurring theme. So we have people from, you know, got 2 students from New Jersey, one from England, one from Vermont, some from Oregon and Arizona and, you know, Michigan. And so people.
One from the Finger Lakes?
Yeah, one from the Finger Lakes, actually, just right up the road. And so all these experiences of, I really want to be in it. I know where I have to be to go to it, you know, having that large, we always tell them we never guarantee them a job, but we'll give you the best chance of getting a job in the industry. 90% of all NASCAR teams are based in there. We have the World of Outlaw Finals based there as well. And so there are a lot of organizations and support, Stock Car Steel, Hypeco, you know, just a lot of support industries that are around our areas too, that some of our students have ended up in as well. And as far as additional students, you know, we'd love more, but we know that at some point there's going to be, you know, a larger cap. You know, we can't have 100 people. How can we guarantee them jobs? If 50 people are graduating to get into the industry, that's kind of probably unattainable. But currently, you know, we just had a rise. Kind of, we had nine incoming last year, 15 this year, and so we're seeing our numbers definitely increase dramatically, and we're ready and willing to accept them and teach them. So. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trey and Quinn. Much appreciated. All right, folks, next up is putting the sports in sports cars by some guy named Elton McGoun. Oh, you mean Skip.
Oh, and they're on
Skip
formal
McGoun.
occasions.
Skip McGoun. This is not a formal occasion, Skip. No.
It's just a black slide. Would you exit out?
Okay, Skip.
This doesn't work.
No, use these here.
Oh, just.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, we heard the term sports car at least a few times this morning. And of course, that's not so surprising in a venue like this, but it is a term that you hear all the time in all sorts of places. But the uses don't always seem to be compatible with each other. Now, in the 15 years following World War II, there were a whole series of books published on sports cars. You know, and in the introduction to each of the books, or in the first chapter, they would provide a definition of what they considered to be a sports car, and then they would go through and list all of the sports cars that had been manufactured up until that point. And not surprisingly, the definitions differed, the lists differed, and I have to admit, I've always been kind of intrigued by the question of just what is a sports car. Now, for me, the car part was not a problem. You know, maybe it should have been, but it wasn't. The problem I had was with the sports part. Now, what I'd like you guys to do is think the word sports. Okay, what images do you have? What associations do you have? What connotations do you have with that word sports? Okay. You know, some are probably obvious. Okay. One is the notion of competition. Okay. Sports, competition. I think that might be a little too simplistic. Okay. Because when you think of sports, you also think of just recreation. Now, this photo here kind of implies there's a connection between recreation that we see here and maybe ultimately some sort of competition. But if you think about it, it doesn't necessarily have to go that way. You don't necessarily have to start with the competition and then kind of move on to the recreation. Okay? You can start with the recreation and move on to the competition. Okay, after all, there wouldn't be professional sports of any sort, you know, if people didn't find the subject enjoyable and had an interest in it. Now, there's another connotation or association of sports that might not pop into your head immediately, but when I show you the image, it should become clearer. Sports is a style, and I put the term sportswear up there because it's very common. Now, what's the connection between sportswear, competition, and recreation? Well, I looked at these pictures, which are photos that I got when I Googled image for sportswear. And I had kind of a hard time associating that with competition. Now, obviously, the footwear on at least the two models to the right might have something to do with track and field. And the model on the right is wearing something produced by Nike, which we knew at least initially was designing, you know, competitive sportswear. Nonetheless, though, even though these associations, the competition, the recreation, the style, you know, in some way go together, but also in some way can be very different. Okay, with that sort of introduction, let's move on to something a little more closely related to sports cars. Okay. Now, I've encountered books in which at least a couple of authors had said, in the beginning, all cars were sports cars. But what did they mean by that? Okay. Well, in one sense, they could have meant that all motoring was competition. Now, the obvious form of competition was competition with other motorists. You know, in fact, I've seen it said that, you know, motorsports developed when the first car met the second car. Okay? But keep in mind, there were other forms of competition. Early motorists were certainly competing with bad roads. They were competing with bad weather. They were definitely competing with bad equipment. So you could certainly say that early motoring was all competition in one form or another, even if you were out there by yourself. You were competing with something. However, if you look at it a little differently, you could argue that at the time, all motoring was recreation. No one would have been doing this if they didn't enjoy it. You know, sure, technically you could look and say they were competing, but you also could say that this was a pleasant recreational activity, at least pleasurable in some way. Then motoring evolved. And it evolved in two ways I think that are relevant here. One is automobiles actually became useful. Okay? People discovered that these weren't anything necessarily frivolous. You could actually use an automobile to make your life better. The automobile enabled you to perform necessary tasks much more easily than you ever could before. Now, another change had occurred around the same time that racing cars became much more specialized. Originally, maybe anyone could get out in their car and compete, but it didn't take too long before the competition reached such a high level that racing cars were very, very specialized. They were very different than the cars that people were using for other purposes. Now, what this meant was we had product differentiation. Okay? So on the left, we had racing cars, which were highly specialized for racing. And on the right, we had what at the time were called touring cars. But pretty much touring car meant a car you just used for normal, everyday purposes. Now, keeping in mind that the word touring does have some kind of recreational connotations to it. Okay? So you've got racing cars and you've got touring cars. Now, obviously, this wasn't an either-or proposition. You didn't have one or the other. You had what I'm calling a gap in between the two, which was certainly filled by vehicles. Now, what was in the gap? Well, what I'm calling at one end of the gap might have been a car you could call just a little bit less than racing. Okay? It was competitive in certain forms of competition, but at the same time, it could be driven on the road. You could drive the car to the competition, you could compete creditably, and then when it was over, you could drive it back home again. And you might even drive the car someplace during the week. Okay, so it was a car that was maybe a little bit less than a racing car. Okay, kind of fell into that gap. Now, on the other hand, you had cars that you could say were maybe a little bit more than touring. Okay, they were practical cars, but at the same time, there was something special about them. There was something fun about them. They had a little zip, a little pizzazz, something that kind of stood out from your generic touring car. Now, the question though is, how big is this gap? What sort of range of vehicles do we find within it? Now, early on, the question I think that you could ask was, could a car that I've described as like a little less than racing be essentially a car that was just a little more than touring? Are we talking really about kind of the same vehicle? And it turns out we actually could at the time, before World War I. So before World War I, these cars in this gap between racing and touring were referred to as sporting cars. Okay, so seriously, this was the generic term, sporting cars. And, this is not a term that I ever think was formally defined, at least nowhere that I could find it. But the idea was that a sporting car was a touring car that could easily, and notice easily is in quotes, what's easy for one person could be nearly impossible for another. But these were touring cars that could be easily modified for competition. And the images that I've shown there are both W.O. Bentley, who was the English distributor for DFP. And on the right, we see him looking rather sporty himself in one of the vehicles. But on the left, we have what I understand is pretty much the same vehicle he was selling in the showroom, but modified for him to be very competitive in the tourist trophy race. Okay. So, pre-World War I, sporting cars. Same car, a little nicer, a little more fun than the regular touring car, but also easily modified to be a competitive car. Now, what this did was it kind of facilitated marketing. Okay, so we have two posters here for the DFP. And you can see that the orientation of the poster on the left was kind of targeting this sort of racing image of the vehicle, whereas the poster on the right, notice, is emphasizing the very practical aspects of the car. Okay, for doctors, officials, veterinarians, business travelers, same car. But the same car could be marketed in these two different ways. And in fact, you could actually market the car for both at the same time. On the left, you have a voiture de sport ou d'agrément, which means sports or leisure car. This is high school French, so don't put a whole lot of weight on it, okay? Or you have a voiture utilitaire ou d'affaires. In other words, a utility or business car. So here we're saying, you know, you got something that's really kind of works for everyone. And you'll notice on the right, the advertisement for DFP says that the sole distributor of the vehicle in Australia is Sporting Cars Property Limited. So, we heard the phrase this morning, race on Sunday, sell on Monday. I have to admit, I believe this has serious limitations. However, these limitations did not apply at this time, mainly because the car that was on the track on Sunday was real close to the car that was in the showroom on Monday, or could be made really close to it. So yeah, early on, when you're looking at a small gap like this, yeah, you could race them on Sunday, and that would be excellent marketing for sales on Monday. World War I shows up. Okay, so what happens after the armistice? Okay, we know the automobile industry boomed in the 1920s. However, the question then is, what sorts of cars would companies build? And, at least equally important, how would companies market these cars? You know, as we saw before World War I, you know, racing could be used to market cars very effectively. Okay. Could we still do that after World War I? Well, one of the problems is that the top-tier racing cars were getting increasingly different from the cars that were in the showroom. Okay? So, you know, what you were seeing on the track was a lot different than you would see on Monday. Now, admittedly, they could have the same name. Okay, so you might imagine that there was some sort of aura or spirit associating them, you know, some sort of brand identity. You know, but this is something that would take time to develop. You know, there wouldn't be that really close relationship. So, what happened as a result of this, which I think is fascinating, we saw this in the past presentation, you tried to move the racing closer to the other end. So the real innovation to me with the Le Mans race was the idea that the vehicles had to have been produced in certain size batches. Okay? So what this meant was it was increasingly likely that the car that you saw on the track winning something, and obviously there were so many classes you had to win something eventually, the cars on the track that were winning something could be pretty close to the cars in the showroom again, if the company had had to make a certain number of them. Okay? Now, this worked real well for the race organizers because it attracted manufacturers, and the manufacturers were attracted to these races because this was an excellent opportunity to, advertise their vehicles. So, nice strategy. The result was that companies responded by producing what they were calling sports models. Okay, so you had, a broader product line, but within that product line, you had a model that was differentiated in some way, referred to as a sports model, and that this sports model would satisfy the manufacturing requirements to qualify for the racing. So for most of the 1920s, we saw sports models. So before World War I, we had sporting cars. Through most of the 1920s, we had sports models, and this was the reason. Amilcar was one that really took full advantage of this. Now, German and Italian manufacturers had their own terms. Okay, Mercedes had Stadtwagen, Tourenwagen, and what we're interested in German, Sportswagen. Okay. Now, in Italy, Alfa Romeo had le più famose vetture sportive del mondo. Okay, so we had a German term and we had an Italian term. Sportswagen, vettura sportiva. Okay, so they began selling their vehicles in England. Okay, I think these ads are from like around 1928. So if you're going to sell your vehicle in England, you're going to have to advertise your vehicle in English. So you're going to have to translate the foreign term into English. So Sportswagen, not surprisingly, was translated as sports car. And Vettura Sportiva was translated as sports car. So Alfa Romeo used the same slogan, but in English, the world's finest sports car. Okay. I believe that this was how sports car first appeared in English and moved into the English language as a term. It was picked up by Bentley. And I believe Bentley was one of the first to do so, at least one of the first that I was able to find. So they picked up the literal translations of the German phrase and the Italian phrase and labeled their 4.5-liter Bentley the British thoroughbred sports car. Okay. Notice, very clearly emphasizing British, not foreign, okay? And emphasizing thoroughbred, in other words, a distinguished heritage. Now, also keep in mind that these were the years that Bentley was winning Le Mans. And most of the newspaper stories about these wins emphasized it was a British car. You know, it was only somewhere down in the body of the article that you discovered it was a Bentley. And these were no longer considered sports models. This was a standalone vehicle. Okay, So, where did the sports in sports car come from? Well, it was a sporting car before World War I. It was a sports model during most of the 1920s. And at the end of the 1920s, and then on into the 30s and beyond, it became a sports car. But what did sport mean? And here's where I go back to the first part of the presentation. And this is the theory that you can decide whether or not you agree with. Anything positioned in the gap between racing cars and at least what were referred to as touring cars is somehow associated with sport. However, if that vehicle is kind of more in the direction of the racing, it kind of captures the competitive connotations of the word sport. Somewhere in the middle are cars that are sports cars more in the recreational sense of the word sport. And I would argue that over on the right side, there are cars that could legitimately be called sports cars, but in the sense of sport as a style. So, what is a sports car? Your call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Skip. Any questions?
Where would the post-World War II hot rod movement fit into this, if at all?
Wait, which movement?
The hot rod movement after World War II, you know, Model A Fords and modification of cars that would be considered sports cars or not?
Okay. First of all, I mean, people can use the term what they want. I'm thinking more of this term in terms of manufacturing and marketing, you know, as opposed to really creating, you know, independent vehicles like that. But cars that were deliberately created not maybe for the personal use so much as for, you know, the intent to make money by selling them.
Any other questions?
Underline your one definition of sports cars. When I was growing up in the 50s, sports cars were often defined as a car that you could use both as racing and on the road. And that was a defining idea. The other thing I remember quite well is that when the Sunbeam Alpine came out, it had roll-up windows and hence was not a sports car.
Yeah, that's true. You know, a lot of the definitions that you really do see are, I would call them kind of purist definitions. And they can get really technical, you know, it has to not have this, it has to have this, it doesn't have this. But I guess with this, what I'm trying to look at is the word sport more, you know, more encompassing, and to address other uses of the word sports car. So lots of folks would not consider those sports cars, but I think in a broader sense of the word sport, yeah, they are.
So is it fair to say that Detroit rarely used the term, and if so, why?
I don't know if that's true, because I know a lot of the Detroit cars are being referred to as sports cars in retrospect. Okay. But what I would have to do is look and see exactly how they referred to them in contemporary terms. That's what was interesting about doing this, is so many cars from before World War I and during the 1920s were referred to as sports cars in these books that were published after World War II. But if you actually go back and look at the advertisements, look at the road tests in magazines, the word sports car, I could only find it used once in 1925 in relation to an Aston Martin. It really wasn't until the late 1920s that sports car actually showed up. And even then, it was a slow transition. It appears as if some magazine publishers were adopting the term earlier on than others. So, it's not like it happened all of a sudden. It happened over a period of time. And then eventually when you came to the SS, that was advertised as a sports car from the very beginning.
Sorry, so that's the SS-100 Jaguar.
Pardon?
Is that the SS-100 Jaguar?
The Swallow.
Let me ask you about three cars, a Jordan Roadster, a Mustang, and a Thunderbird. Which of those would you call sports cars?
Depends on what you call sports. I think I'd have to look back at the time. I think you can call those sports cars kind of in a recreational or a stylistic sense. They probably wouldn't fit the more restrictive definitions that kind of drift over to the left of that. But I don't see a problem with calling them sports cars, because sports is a very, very encompassing term. I mean, some of them came to extremes. I think it was like the Packard Caribbean was called a sports car.
Hi, Skip. Can you give a contemporary example of each of those categories, a racing, a gap, or sports car and a touring car?
How contemporary?
Today.
Oh, gosh. Help me out here.
Well, couldn't you say a BMW M4 is a touring car and a race prepared BMW, like a DTM M4 or the M4s that they race at Le Mans? That's the racing car. And then depending upon whether you order the M4 competition or the M4 non-competition, or whether you order the normal 4 Series that has soft suspension and a non-race transmission, then so that one BMW 3 Series can fit. For the purposes of the microphone there, my argument here is I think that I'm hypothesizing, I might be wrong, a current, say, BMW M4 or 4 Series, in its, small gas motor, automatic transmission mode, it sits near a touring car. But when it's prepared to race in the German Touring Car Championship or something, it's the pure racing car. So with that one car, the BMW M4, for example, I believe that fits in the gap.
Or
is anybody going to try and shoot me down?
What the current Fiat convertible, I would say maybe fits kind of in the middle. But, maybe the Abata version, would kind of move, which actually is sitting in a lot downtown here. Yeah. I didn't even know they could import them.
Okay, where do you put the early hot rods, the old cut-down 32 Fords from out in the West Coast in the late 40s in the sports car picture?
Yeah, that was.
They were also recreational vehicles.
That was similar to the first question, but with this, what I've tried to do is really focus on the automobiles that were manufactured, for sale to the public, as opposed to something like that.
All right, thank you, Skip. Thank you. Next up, we have John Summers. All right, John Summers with Motor Racing as a Mediated Experience. Okay. Use the arrows.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, Bob, and thanks for coming, everybody, and for listening to me. My name's John Summers. I'm a teaching assistant at Stanford University. And my presentation's about motor racing as a mediated experience. All right, the slideshow kicks off. A few years ago at this conference, delegates were amused by the way in which the same image cropped up at the beginning of 3 or 4. Oh, my slideshow's not there. I've not got my slide there, Bob. How do I do that? I toggled off the slide. Let me read on for the sake of time here whilst you come and fix that. We used this image before. Most people who've been here before will have seen this image before, and each presenter was seeking to go back to the beginning of motor racing, and to illustrate this, we used an image of Le Petit Journal, a French newspaper which organised what's now considered the first motor race. That each historian should use the same image from the same media outlet illustrates how racing has been a mediated experience from its very inception. That is to say, there has always been the race, the driver, the car, and the reporter. We historians tend to talk about the former three. Instead, this paper examines how the stories have been told. It's worth talking about because of the current revolutionary changes in automotive media. At first, motor racing was mediated by journalism and illustration. The car came of age in an era before radio, TV, the internet and smartphones, maturing alongside these transformative technologies. However, while illustrations or photographs were common to almost every 20th century publication about motor racing, there were perhaps only 1 or 2 images to illustrate an entire motor race or a completely new car. Minor stories typically had no illustration. The fullest impression of the event or vehicle in the story came from the written word. The denseness of the text is illustrated in these images. So my point here is we've magazines from about 75 years of history from 2 sides of the Atlantic, and you've got the same whole bunch of text, few black and white photographs. To properly discuss the written sources of motor racing, newspapers, magazines and books, and to survey the thousands of automotive writers and publishers thoroughly would require a paper similar in length to this one that I'm giving today. So today my focus is on the present and the future. But what can be said is that throughout the 20th century, innovations in print and distribution steadily increased the reach and scope of racing-themed written word and still photography media. While many of the first images of the cars and racing were painted or drawn, the first photograph was taken in 1825, and cameras were available to well-to-do 11-year-old boys by 1912. Hence this very famous Lartigue image. That he was 12 when he took the picture there, or 11, I think. Until the 1970s, these images were typically grainy and black and white, and I've got a contrast there, 20 years apart of motorsport there. The technologies of photography and the car evolved in tandem, developing slowly in the 19th century before becoming the defining technologies of the 20th. Cars, racing, and the people around racing have always been considered glamorous and associated with good living. As a zeitgeist technological object, racing cars are marvellous to photograph and even better to film. Can you see that's Phil Hill taking a photograph of the Monaco Grand Prix there as a fan, and this photograph book that Road and Track put together here were the photographs that he took as a racing fan in the 1950s. Because fundamentally, what we're talking about here is the human adventure. And I want you to look closely into Bruce Anstey's eye there, because I feel like this photograph captures the human adventure almost better than any other single thing I could think of. Now, I did have sections on the moving image, you know, evolution of cinema, and I wrote a really interesting section on the people that tell us the stories of motor racing, people like Murray Walker and Chris Economaki and Darrell Waltrip, and those were the three examples that I was going to use, but I don't have the time to cover those, and I really want to talk about the contemporary and the future. So I'm going to talk about the state of the nation here, and I'm going to focus on Mark Martin, who's already got a mention, and I know he's very well loved around Watkins Glen. That's why I picked on him particularly. And fundamentally, what I'm talking about here is I have a worry that motor racing's place in posterity is, you know, I worry about what's going to happen after our generation is gone, basically. With cars becoming as ubiquitous and functional as microwave ovens, I worry that people born today will not see our sport as worthwhile. I believe the way to show its value is to tie the great engineering and racing stories of the past to living artifacts, the cars that have survived. Thinking about effective methods and platforms for storytelling means that I noticed how the automotive and motor racing storytelling has evolved in an age of YouTube and of streaming media. And we can even see that within our conference, that our conference has evolved in the last couple of years to deliver, well, on this occasion, to deliver some streaming media. So I first want to talk about the continuous feed. One very obvious recent development is the idea of the continuous feed. By this I mean that there are so many cameras in cars at tracks and covering the race itself that no missed gear shift, fender rub, or expletive over the team radio goes unrecorded. It sits there, ready to be dissected, played 1,000 times over in frame-by-frame slow motion. This is an almost perfect data set, and it must be almost unprecedented in human history. And it's available in perpetuity for future historians. One YouTuber, a Mark Martin fan, traces his driver's many close failures to win the NASCAR championship in precise, point-by-point, agonizing detail. In case that's not enough information, Mark himself tells us the story as he travels the country in his RV. And this is his podcast. I knew nothing about that. He does it season by season, you can see there. More, we have the telemetry results from cars. Were the Ferrari Formula One team to provide access to the data set to a biographer of Fernando Alonso, questions about how or why or where he was better than his teammates could be answered in terms of raw cornering speed, braking point and shift point data. Not only would we know how much better Alonso was, we could probably measure it in terms of seconds per lap. We also have live real-time commentary on social media. The impassioned reactions of a moment, "I can't believe Verstappen turned in on Hamilton," are there in digital immortality on Twitter or Facebook, documenting the feelings of spectators and participants during the race, not just afterwards. Oh, I pushed the button then and it worked anyway. So this is Niki Lauda at the Nürburgring, and I want you to look closely there. It's the Flugplatz, and the car's like, what, half a foot off the ground there, which is, it kind of puts the sweat on my palms just thinking about it, having got some air on a bike there not so long ago. But look, one of the revelations of Lauda's 1976 Nürburgring crash was that a piece of film of the incident exists. It was shot by a spectator on his personal cine camera. In the mid-70s, this kind of unofficial filming was uncommon. Now it's ubiquitous. Unless creators diligently upload to social media platforms, accessing this massive repository is impossible. Even when shared, searching this material is much like combing through microfiche of newspapers, which was the principal research tool of my teens and 20s. And it was dull and time-consuming. The massive archive of personal smartphone videos are akin to the family photo album of the 20th century. It's in your mum's attic, it's covered in dust, it's an undiscovered archive. The result of this information overload in Formula One has led to a development which far predates both cars and any communications technology, and speaks to the way that we humans truly communicate with each other and find meaning in the world around us. Formula One Drive to Survive takes its storylines from Formula One, but packages them in an accessible way for a new audience. This novel form is a story. And indeed, the show plays like a soap opera, a fable over facts with stylized villains and heroes. We may feel this is banal, but it's proved a huge hit and has increased the viewership of Formula One. Events that were previously impossible to cover properly can now be covered. The Isle of Man TT with its 37-mile lap, or Le Mans taking place in rain and at night, were difficult, indeed impossible to cover properly in the 20th century. Now it can be done. One-off events like the Indy 500 have a fresh appeal due to the limited time commitment favoured by our ever busier society. This is in contrast to NASCAR or Formula One, with their 9-month-plus seasons demanding a high level of commitment to sitting on the couch and watching TV. YouTube is a truly revolutionary technology in the study of motor racing history. This is because it's become probably the largest repository of racing content in the world, where anyone can watch the live feed of races and judge for themselves how good each driver was. Understanding Fangio's career is about assessing secondary sources and race results. Assessing Senna's career can be done by watching each of his Grand Prix drives. It cannot be understated how compelling the shift from secondary to primary source is for a historian. This can be expressed a different way. Apart from a few of his cars and his mechanics' advice on the back pages of magazines, almost all of the genius that was Smokey Yunick is gone. Today, Formula One aerodynamicists build their resumes with the insights they deliver in YouTube videos. During the pandemic, YouTube was solidified as the place to learn to fix your car. Searches like brake job on 2012 Camry or radiator change on E46 BMW yield meaningful results. Why pore over a manual when 5 minutes watching a video shows you exactly what needs to be done? This tutoring is free, make and model specific, can be paused and rewatched infinite times, and even allows questions to be asked in the comments section. It's hard to grasp the scope of the revolution in information, narrative, and teaching that this represents. For the last 10 years, I've co-tutored a class called Tales to Design Cars By. In this time, my material, the students, and the automotive world have each evolved considerably. At first, I used to use a clip of the seminal Steve McQueen movie Le Mans to frame my approach and introduce myself, and the movie still forms part of the class today. Back in 2013, McQueen's movie making, and with the Porsche and Ferrari and their 5-litre V12 engines as central characters, remained unusual and distinctive. In 2021, one student commented that if he wanted an immersive oral experience, I'd just watch a 787 on board, referring to the Mazda 787 Rotary, of which there are many films on YouTube and considered by many under the age of 30 to be, quote, the best sounding car, close quotes. In the life of my class, McQueen's work has been eclipsed by the breadth and depth of YouTube. More, YouTube has allowed scope to do more with a given story, to weave race footage and contemporary content into pithy narratives explaining nuanced events and races. Illustrations of this are Super 100 mile an hour's Bathurst histories, focusing on a particular driver or car, and Aidan Millward's Formula One site. This has also created absurdities such as Hot Wheels racing as a spectator sport, so that is a 1/64th scale die-cast in the bottom right. In a way, these people are eating our lunch, as I discussed in my NASCAR Pixar presentation at this conference a few years ago. Truthfully, however, I have to say I think it's fabulous that so many people are doing motorsport history, talking and thinking about cars, racing, and how to document it. Over the past decade, especially through the pandemic, a distinctive culture of car YouTubers has developed. This culture evolved as YouTube began to pay creators meaningful incomes. This is Hoovie, Tyler Hoover, a Kansas-based 30-something and a talented pitchman with an un-American willingness to laugh at himself and a deep, passionate love of modern, semi-collectible cars in need of work. Sprouting from his success are a number of other Wichita-based automotive YouTubers, Hoovie's Mechanic, The Car Wizard, and various other shameless wannabes who launched their channels by buying one of Hoovie's unrepairable hoopties. This phenomenon is not unique. There's another group based in Utah. Absurdly, one YouTuber, The Life of Palos, P-A-L-O-S if you're interested, provides daily updates on the doings of these various automotive YouTubers. Many of these YouTubers became popular during the pandemic, specifically when they bought a Lamborghini. Hoovie currently has 3, financed by the channel, and he's a judge at the Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance. For many years, YouTube's, I'm going to go back there and talk about the podcast in a minute. For many years, YouTube's strapline was broadcast yourself, and this is what Hoovie, Stradman, Tavares, and others like them have accomplished. What happens in front of the camera is different from real life. When we're watched, we act differently. Yet authenticity is critical with a YouTube audience. Hoovie's filmmaking is hammy, his jokes are scripted and unfunny, but the man, his passion, and his car adventures feel authentic, and that's what keeps viewers coming back. In many ways, this is just the same as car guys will tell you at shows, from Good Guys to Pebble Beach. You come for the cars, but you stay for the people. I've talked extensively about YouTube because this is the archive in which I'm immersed. It's important to highlight other forms of emerging motor racing narrative, such as podcasts and audiobooks. This long-form, non-visual content opens up a broader audience for in-depth content. In many ways, this is the ultimate environment for bench racing. Certainly, Dale Earnhardt Jr. never seemed more in his element than on his podcast, chatting with NASCAR figures of his father's, and his grandfather's generation. Long, complicated stories which perhaps could not be told decades ago can now be revealed. The classical art of rhetoric, the spoken word standing alone, is valid once again. The challenge with audio sources is the concentration required to process the dense volume of information. In other words, it's easy to become lost and hence bored. This Mario Rossi, I thoroughly recommend this podcast. If you've any interest in the history of NASCAR, this is an absolutely ripping, awesome story of a disappeared engine builder and the whole Miami Vice scene of southern Florida in the early 1980s. Absolutely awesome story. The rise and rise of the Goodwood Festival shows the enormous mass market appeal motorsports heritage can have. This will surely grow when most cars are silent and odorless. The horsey people with their racing and dressage and specialist haulers and even their special laws. Did you know that in Kentucky you can drive an 18-wheeler on your car license? True story, you can drive an 18-wheeler on your car license, but only if it's towing horses. Only if it's towing horses. So in other words, the horsey people, they need to be a prototype for us, as James talked about. While the Pebble Beach and Amelia Island events have boomed, many car museums are being dissolved and the struggle to remain solvent and relevant. Cars and coffee style events, where you arrive when you want, leave when you want, have become prevalent. That's how we do the car hobby at the moment. And I wonder if that's not going to have an effect on what's collected and what's valued, since traditionally racing cars were considered the most valuable collectible cars, but you can't very well drive a Can-Am car or a Shadow Formula One car to the local Cars and Coffee. And one wonders how long those cars are going to retain that level of collectability, given that. Driving video games represent a completely different way to experience motorsport. Each year, a friend and I have a fantasy bid at the Pebble Beach auctions. I'm not a gamer. He is. He was bemoaning the colour of a rough CTR. It was powder blue. You may have seen it. Gooding had it. I expressed surprise that he should be interested in a hot rod Porsche that was considered vulgar by contemporaries and is collectible now simply due to the tiny numbers produced. He responded, "But don't you remember, dude? Gran Turismo, they didn't license Porsches, but roof, they were licensed. That's why everyone wants roofs now." And if you Google up some prices for them, if you'd owned a roof 10 years ago, my word, you've seen some price inflation recently. And again, today, the creator of Gran Turismo judges at Pebble Beach, and the collectability of modern classics is driven by gaming culture from 20 years ago. So to sum up and try and tie together what I'm saying here a little bit, old cars and bikes make a noise and a smell in a way that electric ones soon won't. Racing cars and bikes are exciting as kinetic sculpture, with the stories of racing, while the stories of racing are eye-popping in an age where personal safety and responsibility trump audacity and adventure. This renders our history of interest to future generations. Today, anyone can do history. The archive method is in your pocket or right now in my hand. However, the skill and diligence of a trained and experienced historian is not so readily available. This means that curation and evaluation skills are more important than ever. The opportunity for historians is greater than ever. Now and in future, we can document in ways undreamed of by future generations. The mechanism to do that is by telling a good story. Just want to conclude now by offering a word on Fred Simeone, who we lost just earlier this year. When I first heard the news, my thought was, now he's gone, who will step into the breach? And just those of you who don't know who he is, probably the finest collection of unrestored racing cars in the world. If not the finest, he and Miles Collier, between the two of them, without doubt, the finest. So this is somebody who's very much, you know, I would regard as a patron saint of the conference almost. And my thought was, since Fred's gone, who's going to step into the breach? Who's going to take his place? He thought so carefully and deeply about racing cars, amassed such a significant connection, influenced the thinking of the whole movement with his passion for unrestored racing cars. This person can't be replaced. But upon further reflection, I've come to the conclusion that while I'm not Fred, and I never will be him, except for folk like us in this room, there's nobody else. So I'm going to do my best to continue Fred's work and carry on telling stories about racing cars and racing drivers. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Questions? Anybody? Questions? I think you explained everything. All right, we're
I'm thorough.
More likely we're dumbfounded. Anyone? Okay, we're going to take a break. Need to be back here, let's say 3:25. 3:25. Thank you. Don't worry about it. You've been doing all the front end stuff. I mean,
Is this a remote or is this a local?
Just brought up is
What, on Zoom? Default speaker has changed. Okay, that's all. It just changes. Hang on, let me check it out here. No, it's fine. I got it right here. That's fine.
It works better.
Where's the other Zoom? Why won't you come back to me? Why won't you get bigger? All right, let me do this. Nope. No, I don't want to do that either. Darn it. I want to get bigger. Hit zoom. I don't want that. Cancel. It should be okay. I just don't know why it keeps changing the output. I want to kill it and restart it is what I really want to do, but that's going to make me the presenter. All right, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Because we don't have a Zoom until after the next one, right?
Right.
Okay.
4 o'clock.
Video control, reclaim host. Why can't I see? Oh, okay, I can see myself up there. All right. So, yeah, the speaker is still out there, so we're good. It's going out over HDMI. I don't know why it was flipping. So if it ever goes to speaker, it's going back to the laptop. It has to be on this WXGA, which is going out through the big speakers. Yeah. But the microphone doesn't really matter. That's
It
just
needs to be on the output.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we can always write that here, but that should be fine. You should be good. Let me check. That's good. That's good. Okay. Yeah, I'll minimize this. Put this over here. Hopefully, normally you just hit the little green to come back. See how there's a little green arrow? And that's it. You can also just sort of leave it off to the behind everything, but because it'll be fine the way it is right now. So let me just, because once you start the presentation, it's just start right over top of it. And actually that gets rid of the little box, unless you want. Why did it do that? Okay, then it changed back. Okay, it's still okay. We can check it. No, it looks good. Okay. I'll just leave that in the background. It's doing whatever it wants to do.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. You should be fine.
Okay. All right.
And this is not hot, right?
That should be off.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
Yeah, sorry, we got you running around during Q&A, right? But
That's all right. Somebody asked.
otherwise, it's like
Keeps
everybody
it-
online can't hear what's going on.
Right. Yeah.
It'd almost be good sometimes to just have a standing one in the middle that people just walk up to.
Walk up to. That's
you know?
a good idea.
Then you don't have to run around. You say get in line.
They can stand in line.
Yeah, and then you have an idea how many people want to ask questions.
That's a good
too.
idea. That's next year.
Future, yeah, lessons learned, right?
Right. Very simple, just these two arrows.
Okay, yeah, this forward. Oh, no, that's
forward.
good. Yeah, okay. And this one back.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
good.
it. Now, sometimes they'll hang up just for a moment,
Uh-huh.
but these are going pretty good. So, see, there's a little hang up. Okay. You just-
All right, well, we'll try
That
that.
arrow and that arrow. That's all you need to do.
So we'll, all right, so this has got,
That you want.
look at that
The
one.
screen is just this one. Yeah.
I'm trying to learn from it.
Yeah, well,
shows you the next
push
slide.
this button forward and that button back, right?
Other way around.
Other way around.
That's forward.
That's forward, okay.
See, this shows your next slide.
Okay, and this one is back. Yeah, okay, good. All right,
This is the preview, and that's what's up there.
right, yeah.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you.
I may be able to work it.
I know, exactly. You and I are on the same classification.
We're struggling though.
Also, we are amongst the rare ones to actually be wearing a jacket. Our predecessor was. I see one or two other folks on. You know,
I'm used to wearing a jacket and tie. I had to wear a jacket and tie to go into the virtual chambers, except when Jimmy Carter.
it's the same. I had to sweep the stairs when I go to join on the prep school. We learned that was that. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. No, I think I'm ready to go. Are you ready? Yeah. Does it work? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I might be ready to help me if but I mean, it's two buttons. So, I'm gonna if I've got it going. Okay, good. All right, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats, please. Take your seats. Take your seats, please. Take your seats. All right, our next topic, presentation, Second to None by Joe Freeman. Joe Freeman.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I always enjoy coming back to Watkins Glen for a couple of reasons. At least two of them are, one, I won my first Formula Ford race here against 25 or 28 other guys, which was pretty exciting. It was also the first Formula Ford race that was held on the new long track, so I was pretty pleased about that. Went home smiling, thinking, of course, I was going to be a Grand Prix champion, which I was not. The second was when I came for a IMSA race that they had for Formula Fords, and had my first comprehensive wreck. I got the red mist and drove over the guy in front of me who was holding me up, and ended up in the guardrail and came out with a very bent car, and luckily not too many injuries, but an abashed sense of competition. The red mist does work. The talk I'm giving today is based on a book, which you'll see back there. You can look through. It's called Second to One. It's an idea that I had several years ago about knowing that there were so many really interesting drivers who had taken second in Indianapolis and were champions and whatnot, and never got any recognition, and nobody knew about them. Or at least if they knew about them, they didn't think that they were of significance. So I felt, let's do a book on that, and it really came out, I think, quite well. But in this case, I've changed the name because I've chosen 3 of these drivers who were really major contributors to American racing. And so it's second to none, because these guys really were, in some ways, not just second to one, but second to none in the sense of their contribution to American racing and to the Indianapolis 500. The first is a man by the name of Earl Cooper. I'm not sure if this name is familiar to you, a lot of you. He was as you can see, a 3-time national champion, 1913, 1915, 1916. And that era literally went from everything from racing on open roads through parts of California where he and other road races on the West Coast, in Tacoma and whatnot, through the first major board tracks, one of which was in Chicago, another of which was in Sheepshead Bay, New York. And I hope all of you are familiar with the fact that there was an era in which all the major championship racing was done on high-banked board tracks, board speedways. If not, come and see me later. Anyway, Earl was second in Indy in 1924, but he was also a constructor and an entrant. This photo is of when he first joined Stutz. Harry Stutz was a tough guy to work for, but Earl really did, he knew how to do it. He had started out in Maxwell, but he was a superb racer. And as a result, he won, I think it was something like 23 national championship races. And he teamed up with a mechanic by the name of Reeves Dutton, and the two of them were practically unbeatable. This is driving in big, open Stutz Bearcats, basically, a mixture of your sports and racing car. And again, all over the country, he really was, he was a remarkable driver. He was not a big man, and yet he would do these literally 300 mile an hour, 300 mile and 400 mile races. I don't know how he did it, but he was really good at it. And Reeves Dutton could take apart and put back anything, anytime, and was a huge help to him. So that as a team, that's one of the reasons why they won 3 national championships. By the way, I have to preface that with a little asterisk by saying that in 1913 and 1915, there was no national championship. It was only later on that the AAA established a national championship in 1916 first. And as a result, it was magazines of the day, the Motor Age, Horseless Age, that declared someone was a champion. And they declared Earl Cooper as being a champion. This is just an example. I believe that's we got a little ahead of ourselves there, sorry. Let's go back to, oh yeah, okay, good. I think this is the governor of California, but under any circumstances, he really was a major driver at his time. Let me catch up here. I just have to be careful not to go too fast here. Again, this is him receiving a major trophy. In 1919, he'd having won all those championships and having been a really superb and well-known sports figure. I mean, a Honus Wagner or a Kai Cobb in some ways in his own day. He decided to retire, and this is a kind of fun shot I put in. This is taken in Tacoma, Washington. That's a big Stutz touring car. He's going fishing, and he's going to relax for life. But then in 1921, why a guy by the name of Joe Thomas, who was driving for Duesenberg, was riding a horse, fell off the horse, broke his leg, and Cooper was there, and they said, well, why don't you drive his car? Not only did he drive the car on the Fresno board track, he won the race. By the way, it's the only time he ever drove at Duesenberg. But the fact was he was able to literally, after 3 years of total time off, beat the best. I mean, Jimmy Murphy and, Jimmy Murphy wasn't really in full blast at that time, but Tommy Milton and a whole series of other really great drivers. So that's, by the way, a fellow by the name of Al Nielsen beside him, one of the Duesenberg mechanics who accompanied him on that win. Here he is in his, it's labeled a big Studebaker, but it's not. As I think most of you will know, it's a Miller. It's a Miller 122, not a 91. And you can see, by the way, in the bottom of there, those are the updraft carburetors underneath the frame. That was prior to the time that they had supercharging for these Millers. This was very much the same as the car that won the race, which was Tommy Milton's Miller that looked almost exactly the same. But Earl was pretty good at selling sponsorship, so he got initially a Studebaker, and then eventually a Studebaker dealer in San Francisco to sponsor him, called Weaver. But so he continued racing and continued winning races, major races, 250 milers, generally on these board tracks. That's what they ran. And at the same time, he could drive almost anything that you put him in. This is one of Miller's early front drive cars that initially were developed in 1924. And by the way, the car that nearly beat him or nearly won the race in 1924 was a front drive Miller. These were incredible machines. They had some weaknesses, but overall they were really fast. He put this on the pole in Indianapolis that year. But as it happens, he also wrecked it, but not in the race. But he was. He didn't finish the race. The gearbox broke, as they did quite regularly on the Miller front drives. That was a weakness. But then he did decide to retire again. And when he retired, but he didn't retire altogether. He made a deal with Dutton. He and Dutton got some money from Buick, which is why there's this odd radiator shell there. And they built their own front drive that they thought would be better than the Millers. The Cooper front drives, I think they built 3 or possibly 4 of them. This is one of them that entered the 500. This is another one. It's a little hard to see Earl behind there, but he is there along with Reeves Dutton. They didn't finish the race, but what's important about these is he was one of the very few people who actually decided to build and enter cars at Indianapolis, as well as be a driver after he'd finished driving. They were successful enough so that these chassis continued on. I think that there's still, I know there's still at least one around, and I think they continued racing at Indianapolis after the Second World War. They were modified in all sorts of different ways, but the Coopers were just known. You can see his engine configuration was a little different. It was a straight 8, double overhead camshaft engine, but his exhaust system and the trying to get the car as low as possible was one of the things that he was attempting to do with this particular design. So after after he finished with that project, why, he went on, became a car dealer for Marmon, and at the same time kept his involvement with racing throughout his career. He worked for the Union Oil Company and developed a number of different products for them. He was also, by the way, one of the earliest people to use ethyl lead for his engines in the 500. He and Tommy Milton were there. And he stuck around Indianapolis. Here he is in his latter years with Pete DiPaolo. He remained an official until his death, and was, again, extremely well-known American sports figure who was very much appreciated. Earl the Pearl, they called him. Also, the California Comet. He had a lot of different names, but he was a really quick guy. The next person I've chosen is Harry Hartz. Harry Hartz was a really interesting fellow. He started out as a, well, here's his rundown. He was a national champion in 1926. He won 7 major board track championship wins. Second in Indy in 3 times, 1922, 23, 26. IndyCar entrant from 1930 to 1940. And wins as an owner in 1930 and 1932 at Indianapolis. So no small hitter. He started out, here's a nice portrait of him. The Chevrolet is a reference to his time when he was being a mechanic for Billy Durant's son, Cliff Durant, who was promoting Chevrolets at the time, and they were racing together. So that's why he has that Chevrolet badge on. But he started out as a kid racing these small race cars that were basically motorcycle engined creatures. There were actually quite a few of them. A few have survived. And they had races on board tracks the same way, and also on road courses. I think they raced in Santa Monica, etc. And he got his first name through those, and he called himself the junior racing champion of the world. I think, well, maybe he was. I'm not sure. I don't know how many kids were doing that at the time. But he also, as he grew older, he associated himself with various folks, including a very well-known driver by the name of Eddie Hearn. Hearn had one of the 1915 championship-winning Stutzes that were remarkable cars. Believe it or not, they built 4. And 2 are still in existence, one in the United States in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles County Museum, and the other in New Zealand. They were hugely successful. Harry Stutz used them as a promotion, but then when they won the 1915 championship, he said, I'm done with racing, I don't want it anymore. And he sold his cars, and at least some of them, and maybe all of them, went to Cooper, but eventually ended up in the hands of Cliff Durant, who was racing them. And this is Harry working on the engine. By the way, you can see it's a single overhead cam engine with the exposed valves and whatnot. But in the day, they were light, fast, and could win on road courses, on board tracks, and on sand, just about anywhere they wanted to race. This is a picture of his first win at Indianapolis. Sorry, it's not the best quality of picture that I have. But it's a Duesenberg, and it was a Duesenberg that actually is, we believe, if it's correct, yes. This is the actual car that is still in existence. It's in Fred Simeon's collection. I'm sorry, it's not that car, but it's one of the 3 cars that were taken to France in the 1921 French Grand Prix. Jimmy Murphy won with his, and the one driven by Joe Boyer, another driver, was brought back. Harry Hartz bought it, and that's it. That car is still in existence and very, very original. It's amazing that it survived all the years through its racing. It raced in California, it raced in the East, eventually was bought by, they tried it at Indianapolis later on, didn't work. Fred Simeon's father bought it from a family by the name of Bergert, who owned it at the time, kept it, and I had to convince Fred that he had one of the most important racing cars in the United States. He wanted to keep it the way it was. It had been for 1930, but when I sent him a lengthy article I had written about it, he called me up and said, "Joe, I had no idea you knew that much about this car. I'm going to restore this and restore it as a real racing Duesenberg." So if you go to Philadelphia and you look at that car is there. It's one of Fred's really remarkable machines. He continued, by the way, with that car he raced in 22 was a full Duesenberg with a Duesenberg engine, but by 1923, Jimmy Murphy had bought a Miller double overhead cam engine, which seemed to work better than the single overhead cam Duesenbergs, the 183 cars that were 183 cubic inch cars. And as a result, Murphy bought a Miller and put it in his Duesenberg chassis and called it the Miller Special. He won the Indianapolis 500 with it. Seeing that, Hartz, not to be left behind, got his own Miller engine and put a Miller nose on it on the Duesenberg, and this is him on a board track racing that in the latter part of 1922 and in 1923. But by the time that Indianapolis rolled around in 1923, why the Millers had become basically almost ubiquitous, sponsored by the first real big, you might say, swatch of them, I think 4 or 5, were built with money from, again, if you can see the side there, his sponsor, Cliff Durant. Cliff Durant actually is an unknown figure in a lot of American racing. He was the son of Billy Durant, who founded General Motors, and believe me, his money paid basically for a lot of innovation that, including, for example, the front drives, that really transformed American championship racing, particularly during this board track era. Finally, the third second place was in 1926. That's the year that Frank Lockhart won in the rain, but you can imagine, here's Harry again. I got to say, he must have been enormously frustrated by the fact that he'd taken second 3 times, just coming within inches of winning the big race, but never did. But he continued his career until 1927. He got one of the front drives and made a national championship in that year, in 1926. He also set several close course world records, including one at a board track speedway in Amotol, New Jersey. It was a track named after an munitions factory that was built there. In any case, and he won he set a world record for a 300-mile distance. I've forgotten what it was, but these were 1,500 cc engines, and I believe it was the average for the race was over 130 miles an hour, if you can imagine that. Double overhead camshaft, small pistons. Gordon White here had brought along one of the little 91 pistons. It's amazing to see, but these cars were incredibly fast for their size. By the way, they were also all supercharged at the time, and that technology had been pretty well developed, and they'd also improved on lubricants and fuels, along with tires. There were a lot of board track innovations that came along as racing matured. It basically, between the competition between first Louis Chevrolet, the Duesenberg brothers, Fred Naughey, and of course Harry Miller, who Gordon will talk about later. Harry had a really serious accident in New Hampshire at the board track there, nearly killed him. He was very badly injured, but was burned, broke ribs, broke arms, and whatnot, and basically, I think, probably damaged his brain enough so he was never able to race again. But he stuck around, and lo and behold, he started to enter his own cars at Indianapolis. and this is one of them. This is from I believe it's the car from 1932, which was a winner. That huge trophy, by the way, if you don't recognize it, is one of the crown jewels of the collection of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. It was made by Tiffany. It's called the Wheeler-Schiebler Trophy, and it's given to the car that's leading at 400 miles. Well, it's an amazing trophy. I've seen it in person. They had it at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston for a Tiffany exhibit. It's just incredible. If you get there, again, they don't put it on display. I don't quite understand why. Here we have again some of the old timers. That's from left to right, Babe Stapp, who was a regular racer at the time, but had retired by this time. Earl Cooper. This is in Indianapolis, of course. Tommy Milton, who was the chief steward at that time. You can see on his AAA car, and Harry Hartz to the right. So these guys were the old timers around Indianapolis, but they were very well respected. They were all served as various shall we say, officials and sort of advisors to Rickenbacker, and then after the track was sold to the people who owned it after Rickenbacker. Here's another group of interesting people. Left to right, again, Peter DiPaolo, who was, of course, a winner several times. Eddie Hearn behind him, who Harry had been a mechanic for. And the infamous Mike Boyle in the middle. Umbrella Mike, if you haven't read that story or know that, again, come around and ask me about it. He was quite a character. And Harry Hartz. So this was, they were, again, hanging around Indianapolis at the time, getting ready for the 500. Again, this is the sort of final picture of Harry. He was basically got very old. I think he died. This was taken in 1971. He died in 74. But again, sadly, an unknown figure, a man who really contributed to the race in a lot of different ways, and drove a lot of different cars. He drove cars on the Salt. He drove cars, he drove a car backwards across the United States and set a record. So. Quite an interesting character. All these guys were. I'm picking these because they're kind of fun and interesting. Finally, we got Lou Moore. Lou was not as much of a standout racer, although he certainly did well. He started in very competitive racing in California at a track called Ascot, not the Ascot you know nowadays, but it was a very, very popular track during the 30s. Very competitive. So a whole number of major drivers came out of there, including, say, Rex Mays and, oh gosh, the names would go on and on, who were racing it and who developed their skills at Ascot, which was not, by the way, it was a packed dirt racetrack. I think about, I want to say it was a little longer than a half mile. I think it was maybe about three quarters of a mile. You can see he was second in India in 1928, but kept racing during the so-called junk formula era, when Indy cars had gone back to riding mechanics and supposedly to get manufacturers involved. And at the same time, he finished third in 1933 and 1934, and then he himself turned to be an Indy entrant. There's a good shot of him as a driver, and one early shot of him. This is the number 28 car, is the one he took second in. A copy of that car is called the Majestic Miller, bright green, by the way. Green was not allowed in Indianapolis for a long time. They thought it was a hoodoo, but it was green anyway. But in this particular case, it was before it was the Majestic Miller. It was that next year. So there he is. Here he is in one of the two-man cars again. There's Mike Boyle's name coming up, and I think this is one of the cars he finished third in. but he himself felt he should retire. He wasn't doing well enough. And so as a result, he himself turned to being an entrant. He encouraged a car builder by the name of Curly Wetteruth to build a very, by the way, by this time in 1937, Indy had returned, or 38 had returned to one-man chassis, and in 1939, Lou Moore entered this Wetteruth chassis with I believe my names are failing me here, but I believe that's Floyd Davis. Floyd won the race for him. The first race he's won on an entrant. Floyd was killed in the next Indy 500, sadly. But in the next year, 1941, I believe, he hired Murray Rose, who was an up-and-coming young driver at the time, Rose, along with another driver, took his car, again, that Wetteruth, and won the Indy a second time. So he was a two-time winner by that time. He, of course, took time off during the war, but then following the war, it was sort of a mixture in 1946 of cars that had just been assembled together. But Lou Moore said, no, I want to build something really original. And so he embarked on building these very radical front drive cars. They were made by a man by the name of Emil Diet. And they were very successful. They had a low sense of gravity, and as a result, Murray Rose was able to dominate the Indianapolis 500 for 2 years running, in 1947 and 1948, winning the race there. So 2 more wins for Lou. And finally, Rose's partner, Bill Holland, was not too pleased, particularly in the second time around, about being beaten by Rose. But Rose broke in 49, and as a result, Holland won his race. So Lou Moore was truly a magnificent and interesting character, and not only in terms of the innovation he brought to the track, but also the success for the Indy 500. Here's the final entry that he had. It was in 1950, final entry that actually made the race. In 1952, with again one of his front drive cars, that's Tony Bettenhausen, who drove for him for 3 years. But by that time, the cars were really out of competition. They weren't competitive. In any case, all of this information I've gone through has come out of the book that I've done here. It's second to one. It was an idea that occurred to me, as I say, because I felt it was really important. There are about 40 drivers in here who were, and their names in there, again, like these folks, but Rex Mays, and of course, probably the most famous would be Michael Andretti, who wrote the Ford for us. It was incredible how many times he came close to winning the race and didn't. The Andretti curse really covered his career. So that's about it. Other than to say that I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to take us back to some of the history of American racing when it was really a successful and major sport in the United States. Sadly now we're I bet I could ask people in the room how many people would know who the national champion was, who won the national championship this year. Can anybody tell me who won the national championship this year? Nobody? Who won the national championship of American racing, of IndyCar racing? Yeah, that shows how unfortunately, sadly, American racing, particularly open wheel racing, but all American racing has been just the television ratings are zero. The emphasis is going away, even for NASCAR as well as others. So that's a whole nother topic. But I thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed my kind of race through a couple of three guys who are really kind of interesting early drivers.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Stay put. We'll see if I have any questions.
Yes.
Gordon White.
For any of you who don't know, Joe has become a publisher, and he's published one of my books as well as a number of other, what I think are important racing books.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
Okay.
Over to the left.
My name is John Ock. Just a question on Louis Chevrolet and a little history on his racing at Indy.
Louis, I'm trying to remember how many times he raced at Indy, and I don't recall right offhand, but he initially came to the United States, actually to Canada, as a chauffeur, then was hired in New York. The first major race he did was one of the Vanderbilt Cup, and I want to say, oh, I'm sorry, as I say, I think it was 1904, 1905. It was his first a race on Long Island. He drove a car for a guy, a big Fiat, had a wreck, nearly killed himself. But he continued racing on and off. But primarily, he wanted to build his own car, and he went to Billy Durant and said, I want to build a Chevrolet. Well, Billy Durant said, fine, but what Durant had in mind, what Chevrolet had in mind, Louis Chevrolet had in mind, was a quality car. What Billy Durant had in mind was something to compete with a Model T Ford. Well, Durant won and came out basically turning a car that was called the Little at the time into the first two Chevrolets, the Royal Mail, and I tend to forget the name of the second. And so Louis was totally disinterested. He built his own racing cars called Frontenacs that competed with the Duesenbergs and eventually Harry Millers. But then subsequently he and, one of his brothers, he had three brothers who came to the States. One was killed, sadly, in 1920 at a race in Los Angeles on one of the board tracks. Then he and his other brother started a company called Frontenac, and they made speed equipment for Model T Fords. Literally, first just hot up systems to improve the engine, but primarily to heighten its fuel consumption, but then eventually went to overhead valve systems, the first one called single stick, and the second one then called a Dio. Those are very rare. I think they only built about 3 or 4 of them, but they were very successful well into the 30s. So he had a full career in racing and around racing, but he was not as a driver. He competed at Indianapolis, but I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly which years and what cars he drove. I should know, but I'm a little blank on that. I'll look it up. By the way, one just tool that some of you might want to learn to use, which I've found hugely valuable, is called champcarstats.com, www.champcarstats.com. If you go on there, it's got all the drivers, a lot of the car makes, all the races for different years, and extremely full statistics. So if you need to hunt up something, you can do it very quickly on that site. There are a few mistakes here and there, but believe me, for a person who's researching racing or wanting to know about drivers and their careers, that's where to go. It's a really useful site, and I'm glad we have it. Any other questions? If not,
hello, my name is Susan Webb.
Oh, yes, okay.
I have a question. My question is, who was the driver that won that race?
That won the
one you were talking about, the big race.
You mean the Indy 500? Or
yeah, the one that you were talking about. Yes.
Oh, the Indy car? Oh, it was, of course, now I'm going to go out of my head. Yes, it was willpower. Yes, it was willpower for driving for Roger Penske. You're quite welcome. Sorry, I should have said that, but anyway. But again, the year before, well, very few people would remember. It's not. We're not anywhere near where we should be. But thanks again. I appreciate it, and always enjoy coming here.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. You all right? Okay. All right, folks, next up is Trevor Lister. It's, I believe, 9 o'clock in the morning in New Zealand where he's sitting, 9 o'clock Saturday morning. And Trevor's is giving a talk, much of the research shared with Don Capps. And truth is the daughter of time. Trevor, can you hear me? Trevor, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Oh, gotcha. Trevor?
Good morning, everybody.
Hey, right. We got a connection, Trevor. It was better than yesterday.
It's a lot better than yesterday. Pleased to see your smiling face.
All right. Let me bring up your PowerPoint. I've got it. Stand by, Trevor.
Thank you.
Okay, Trevor, tell me, we have the title slide up. Do you want to just speak while the slide's showing?
Yes, if I could do that, Bob, that would be fine.
Just tell me when to advance. Okay, go ahead.
First of all, good morning to all my old friends in the Glen. It's been a while since I was last there, and especially if Donald Capps is in the audience. A big hello, Donald. Thank you very much for your support over the years. I will be talking today on what might sound on a little strange approach to vehicle identity, old Maseratis specifically in the 1950s. I'll be looking at the different ways in which a vehicle can be identified and what that might mean for the provenance of the vehicle. Bob, how's things going on that first slide?
Okay.
That's good. Just as a little story perhaps about an Englishman, an Italian, and an American who met in a bar and started discussing identity of the vehicles. The Englishman would say all of the chassis is the most important part of the vehicle, and it's the chassis number that sets the identity for the vehicle, and it's that identity from that point on until the day it gets put on the scrap heap. The Italian would say something different, and Enzo Ferrari did back in the 1960s. He said, I don't sell cars. He said, I sell engines. The car is only there. He says, I throw it in for free because something's got to hold the engine in. Quite a different approach The American was probably Bob, because he was the story I've got here is coming from a Ford perspective, and Henry in the 1930s would identify the vehicles coming down the production line were identified according to their engine number. So imagine yourself on at a very busy plant. The engine has just been passed through its pre-run testing. It's just about to be placed in the vehicle. It has a gearbox attached to it. The gearbox gets stamped with the engine number, and then the bodywork gets applied, and just before the bodywork gets done up nice and tight, the engine number is stamped on the frame. Nice and simple. The engine sets the identity of the car. We could run just a little further on that one and say that in Italy there is a wee twist. If it's Enzo talked about production cars as well as race cars, but at Maserati, if a engine in a race car was changed, then the identity of the vehicle was changed to match the engine number. That is, the engine number didn't just set the identity when it first rolled off the production line. It was quite capable of changing and giving a different vehicle identity as the vehicle was raced, even race to race. We've hit, sorry, Bob, I've just run out of out of puff there for a moment. How are we getting on with the slides, Bob?
All right, we got the Ferrari number 11 car up.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
We got the number 11 car up.
Thank you, God.
There's your second slide.
Yeah, could I have the first slide? Yes, could I have the second slide, please, which is the red one. If you've got that up on the screen.
It's up there.
Thank you very much. I've chosen this car as an illustration of what happened at Maserati because it's a very rich car in terms of its background and its provenance. If you look at it on the slide, it looks like pretty much like a standard 1950s Maserati Formula One car, but in fact it is not. It started off as a 2-litre Formula 2 car, and it had a chassis number given by its engine, a identity number given by its engine of 2038. That was its first identity. In the very early part of the 1954 Formula One racing season, the cars were in Argentina, and Maserati had a lot of orders for its new 250F Formula One car, but unfortunately it could not supply every customer at the same race. And so some of the Formula 2 cars were adapted to Formula 1 specification, mainly by putting a bigger engine in and running them as Formula 1 cars. This is one of those cars. When it got its Formula 1 engine, replacing the old Formula 2 one, its identity changed to match the new, larger engine. In that guise, this car was known as 2510, and that wasn't the end of its identity. The following year, it was revised, bodywork revised, which is why you see the lovely 250F type bodywork on it in the photograph. And its engine was changed once more. It now got engine 2518 and it took on identity 2518. So if we trace this car right through, we see 3 identities all set by the engine that it was carrying at the time. And it doesn't stop there. The interims, there were 4 of them altogether. They all had that same pattern of giving up their old Formula 2 number and adopting the Formula 1 engine number. And each and every one of them followed exactly the same pattern. So I'm comfortable looking at the interims to say that, yes, that's how it goes. The Maserati was obviously identifying according to engine number, and if the engine went to another vehicle, it would carry its identity, take the engine identity with it. So far so good, except in England they didn't do that. And in England there was a lot of interest in Formula 1, of course. It was just getting to the point where England was really ready to start dominating Formula 1 in a year or two's time. And the English commentators were very keen on pushing for the chassis number to be the one which identified the car. This might be so in England, but it's not so everywhere else. Unfortunately, the English men did most of the commentaries, and quite frankly, they did it according to the English pattern, that the chassis number determined the identity. Not quite so, because excuse me. The English pattern is strict and rigid. It says that's the identity, it's the chassis, and that's all that matters, and it will always be forever. But that approach is no good whatsoever in a set of circumstances where the engine number will change and the identity will change, and a vehicle may carry 3 or 4 different identities in its lifetime, or the same engine may turn up on 3 or 4 cars or more, which means that when we look at the old commentaries and the identities, we now have another question to ask in terms of provenance. And that question is not, is this the car you think you've got? The question now becomes, does this car have the background that you said it was? Is it really the car that Fangio used in a particular race on a particular day? Because if it's had multiple identities, we're now going to have to say which identity on that day was the one that was used. And that's the implications for provenance. Bob, how are we going on the third slide?
Okay, we're there.
Yep. Thank you very much. This car is a Maserati 250F with a very interesting background in provenance. It is actually the is the third car of 3 to carry engine and identity 2504. The first car to do so was one of the interim Formula 1 cars that we saw before. When the customer car was ready, the full Formula 1 car was ready, the interim was sent back to the factory, and the brand new 250F was given to Prince Bira, and he had a great time racing it in the 50s. Except he only raced it 1.5 races. It was he was ill at the British Grand Prix and made a deal with the BRM team to have a second driver drive his car if he, Bira, could not do so because of his illness. He did come in to the race halfway through the race. He came in, the drivers changed positions. The BRM driver took the car out, And within 2 or 3 laps, had managed to roll it, put it over on its lid, and damaged the car quite a lot. The unfortunate part was that Burrow now had a race meeting the following weekend, which would have a lot of starting money, but he had no car to race. So the deal was made with the BRM team that they would swap the engines and their identities into the cars. The damaged one would be retained by BRM, and Burrow would go away with the old BRM team car, and that's what he would race. And so it turned out. Nobody said anything about it for a long, long time. The museum itself, the car itself was photographed outside a museum in New Zealand. It came into New Zealand as car 2509, which was the BRM team car. But it wasn't 2509 at all. Underneath it, it was 2504. We checked this out a few years back by putting a tape measure over it. There was a difference in builds between the two. 2504 was a very early car, and it had a slightly shorter wheelbase, and we measured it up, and sure enough, the car masquerading as 2509 in New Zealand for many, many years, it's actually 2504. The third of the cars to carry that number. And also one fourth one later on also carried the engine number 2504 and was also known as 2504. So that's four vehicles, one identity. So 4 vehicles, 4 engines, one identity, 2504. This rearrangement of engine numbers every time identity numbers every time an engine was changed has been around for a long time. The Old English commentaries actually noticed that the changes had taken place. They would note, for instance, that car 2512, at least I'm pretty sure it was 2512, was turning up to race as 2514 or something like that, and would note that there was a change in identity but gave no clue whatsoever or any thought to why that may have been so. And then to answer that question, we go to Donald's database. It's a very, very large database, and very well laid out. I've got to thank Don for giving me access to that database a long time ago. An unknown turns up on his emails one day and says, "Do you mind if I muck around with your database?" And to Don's credit, he said, "Yeah, go right ahead." What Donald had done is captured the engine numbers for each vehicle, each car in each race. And when his database was put alongside the older commentaries, there was a one-to-one correspondence between what the older commentaries had just noted as this car raced as 2514. For instance, Donald's database showed that on this race, yes, it did run as 2514 and that it also carried engine 2514 for that race. So we were able basically to take all of the old puzzles of identity from the 250Fs and as a side issue, every other Maserati as well that was raced in the 50s, and solve a lot of old puzzles and problems which had found their way into the earlier commentaries. So we are now quite happy to say that Maserati identified its race cars according to the engine that was in them at the time. Could you put Don's page up on for vehicle 2512, Bob, and get it up in the...
It's there?
Wordy one. Thank you very much. If you have a look at this document, you'll see on Don's side notes on the right-hand side of the page Every now and again he will note with engine 2514. For instance, he's following car 2512, which is a very interesting little thing in its own right. And Donald.
There we come. Hmm? Trevor, if you can hear us, we have a connection problem. Not yet. This happened yesterday, folks, during our test.
I love technology when it works. Unfortunately, this is part of the technology I developed, so blame me.
Still nothing, Eric? There he is.
Let me step in here for a second.
No, let Eric step in.
Yeah, I don't think he knows that it's not working. Don't touch it. Yeah. The question is he still talking? Hang on. No, I don't want that. Okay. You still there? Can you hear us?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I can hear you well.
All right, good. We're back. Sorry about that.
No worries at all.
Trevor, we lost you right after we put up Don's chart.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thanks, Bob, and thank you, team, for sorting that for us. We'll go and have a look at Don's chart again and pick up the bits and pieces there. The right-hand side of Don's chart has got a whole lot of side notes, and those side notes include any instance where a engine had been changed and the identity of the car had been changed to match the engine for that particular race. That's just trace your eye down the right-hand column. Because they had not fully explored the possibilities. To go with this, if you wish to contend this with us, we'd be very, very happy to have you do so, because the more attention we put to it, the more accurate we get with our data and our conclusions. There is a set of papers to go with this presentation, and they are available from Bob if you wish, or Bob will give you an email from me and you can get them direct off, which has a look at the whole thing, but it's only 17 pages long and we won't be able to get there. Don, nice to see you. How are you going?
Yeah. Okay, I'm the one who put this together, so let me try to explain it to you. I am a trained professional historian, so when I started seeing anomalies in data that I'm digging out of various sources from the archives and so forth, and Trev was pretty clever to pick up with this with me, because everybody else thought I was crazy and a complete nutcase. Let me explain it this way. there is how the rest of us do things, then there's the way the Italian automakers do things. Maserati, and I think Travis pretty well hit this, they looked at the motore as how they tracked these cars, these things that rolled through the racing shop. When it came in, they pulled the engine, they did all the little maintenance on the chassis, and when it was time to roll it out, they put whatever engine was ready in that car. Now, originally, the chassis and the motor all pretty well matched, but engines blow up, you build new engines, but you don't always build a new chassis, or you build a new chassis, put an old engine in it, that sort of thing. So Dino, Gino, and Luigi, all working in the racing shop, tracked it by the engines. It's kind of like those of you who can do a calculator versus those of us who are completely baffled by them because we do scientific notation. It's that different. They were not like the English. Like, as Trevor pointed out, back when it all starts, it's all matches. And what I started finding is I started digging and digging and digging and digging, was here for like 2512. Okay, the English would call it car 2512. Well, when it got engine 2514 in it, to the racing shop and to Alfacini Alfieri Maserati, the entrant, it became a different car, 2514. The problem is, as long as it stayed in Italy, not a problem. But what happens when it crosses a border? Paperwork. So to make the paperwork match whatever the parts in the engine, it's easier to fix because it's all just paperwork, or you put a little tiny metal strip over the actual number of the chassis, or the engine, as the case may be. So everyone else says that's 12, but to the factory it's 2514. All their paperwork says 2514. All of the automotive historians and people tracking, doing the chassis cult, checking all the blocks on that, it's a different car. So that's basically what Trev and I came to the conclusion. It's like, there's a problem here. And everyone thinks Trev and I were out of sync because they didn't think of the Italian, in this case the Maserati. But when Trev went back and started looking at the history of previous cars, and just gives, Trev, we found the same thing. It wasn't just the 250Fs. It was other cars prior to that. So what we're basically saying is identity is as Travis, I think, made very clear, is not always what you think it is. So that's one of the little things you have to watch when you're a historian, particularly if you're an automobile racing historian, is sometimes what you're given isn't necessarily what the case is. It's according who you talk to. An automobile normally has, as Trevor correctly pointed out in the first slide, it has an identity as whatever the VIN number or the chassis number was. But for the Italians, they thought a little differently. The motore was what they created. Did I do okay there, Trev?
You're doing fine.
Now that you're all confused, don't laugh. We have fought this battle, Trev and I, for what now? Better part of a decade? Something like that.
Yeah, that'd be that would be close to it. And also, Don, as you say, people saying to me that it cannot possibly be true, which is just the fuse you need to light if you want me to prove something.
Yeah. Now, I have a good friend who just got an award, the Lifetime Achievement Award in England for his writings. This guy named Doug Nye. And Doug and I go back a long way. We've actually had Doug here at the Research Center, 20 years ago? Holy mackerel, yeah, it's 20 years ago now. I can con people and all kinds of things. But he is reluctant to accept this because, let's be blunt, he's a pommy, and that's how they do things. It's everything's the chassis. But when I talk to people in Italy, they go, so seriously, no, makes sense. Motori, non accelerico, it's a motori. So it's a little different. When you start, and it's just like anything else, when you switch over to certain types of history and nationalities, you have to be very careful. We may all agree that on the auction block it's 2512, but really, if it's got the engine 2514 in it, that's what the mechanics called it. So that's really all Trev and I are saying. It's like give us a chance to do this. It's not how everybody operates, but then again, I'm helpless. I do scientific notation. You give me a regular little calculator, and I'm completely helpless because that's how the mind worked, and it's how they worked. And they didn't print off a copy. The things. What about 2 centimeters thick now? 3 centimeters, 4 centimeters thick. The log book. So there's a lot of effort that goes into this. And we hope you get an understanding that identity, particularly in racing, is malleable. Very malleable. You could see Richard Petty in car 43. But car 43, one season is not car 43, the next season, et cetera, et cetera. But it's always what to you, car 43. So that's part of what got this going, is that it is changeable, it is malleable. Anyway, now that we've confused you all, anything you want to throw in there, Trevor?
Yes, thanks, Don. As Don has said, the the thing that we are working on turned to be much, much larger than just the 250Fs. The little recalibration, internal recalibration that the engine will set the chassis number, the identity number for a particular race, applies right across the board. We've picked it up in all sorts of places, and every time we have a puzzle, we've managed to solve it by tracing and chasing the engine, whether that be a sports car, a Formula One car, or even a 1930s or a very early 1928s. It comes down to the same thing. Engine equals identity, well, at least for that day. Thanks, Don.
Okay. That's our story, and we are definitely sticking to it. Okay? Any questions for us?
Yeah, we got a couple, but Don, basically, hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on. We got a question over here, Don.
Okay. Blast away.
John Summers. How am I going to frame this? Don, I feel like the reason that Doug Nye doesn't want to commit to accepting this research has nothing to do with his nationality and everything to do with the fact that Doug Nye is retained by auction companies to confirm the identity and the history of valuable old racing cars. And when yourself and Trevor presented this research a couple of years ago at a conference that we were both at, I happened to have lunch with a very well-known classic car and racing car broker, and I said to him, dude, what do you think of this? And he said, well, it's all a load of bollocks, because to try and unpick the identity of all of these cars, it would destroy his credibility with people who he's had business relationships with for years and years and years. So I'm not saying that it's fine that that's the attitude, but what I am saying is that there's an awful lot of money and an awful lot of water that's gone under the bridge with a lot of these cars, and it would be very risky for his professional position for somebody like Doug Nye to say, you know what, all these Maserati 250Fs that we've identified as being, this is the Sterling Moss car, this is the Berra car, if we were suddenly to throw all of that up in the air and leave everybody feeling as faintly confused and dissatisfied as we're feeling at the moment about the identity of these cars, there's almost no upside. I feel it's a little bit like when colleagues of mine at the university proposed systems to better identify whether or not a particular car was authentic or not. And the pushback that we had from within the old car community was, you know what, we don't want to know if it's inauthentic. I want to believe that Sterling Moss owned my car and raced my car, and I don't know, it's in nobody's interest to do all of the research simply to cast doubt on the identity of this particular car.
Yeah, it was not an easy concept at first to accept because we've all been drummed and this is how it is. It was only those little pesky things called facts, because fortunately, and this was the key, if you dig, and that's what we do, by dumb luck, I made the acquaintance of a guy named Barry Hopkirk up in British Columbia, Vancouver, who had an interest in the 250Fs, and it was a mania, basically. And he had all these chassis numbers that he created, because some cars you could count the louvers and some you could do the dents and all this sort of thing. It was particular to that chassis. However, he also had gotten, by accident, basically, the numbers of the engines in those cars. And what I started noticing, something that Barry just didn't quite get, he thought I was nuts like everybody else, was, wait a minute, you're calling this, use our example, you're calling it 2512, but the factory's calling it 2514, and everybody else is calling it because the chassis is 2512. But the Italians are calling it that. So what's wrong? But you're correct. The commercial interest in changing all this it would only be basically Maserati, Bondini, a bunch of the Inis, if you will, that did this. Remember, Ferrari started off that way, and then because he had so many English customers, said it was much easier. Because if you ever look at the Ferrari list, there is the Tulare, the Valero, the chassis, but if the engine's different, it's noted. It's always noted, and a lot of times you'll find on the paperwork the engine in the Ferrari paperwork. If you dig, this is a fascinating topic that I never dreamed I'd ever be dealing with. But identity became an issue simply because it was so confusing. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm taking more time than I anticipated on it. I think Joe's got a question. And don't beat me up too badly, Joe.
I just want to say that I think it's a little unfair to paint strictly Italian automakers for this kind of confusion. Doug Nye and I had a long and interesting session together on the identity of Lotus 19s. As most of us may know, a certain English manufacturer of cars named Lotus, whose last name was Chapman, had a tendency to want to change things around. And there were all sorts of good and sometimes bad reasons. Sometimes they needed to get it across the border, and the one that was on the paperwork had one chassis number, and the one they had in the truck had another one, so they changed it. In the case of Lotus 19s, it is truly murky. I got involved with a car that claimed to be the first that Moss drove to two very successful races, first at Riverside and then at Monterey. There are 3 people in the world who claim absolutely that they own that car. The joke is that the car was actually comprehensively destroyed in an accident in New Zealand, and the remains of the car came back in a suitcase that went into the baggage, the upper baggage container of the jet that it came back on. So it's a fascinating topic, and one that's full of all sorts of problems. I've been yelled at any number of different times about that sort of thing. So it's good for you guys for doing it. It's fascinating. And yeah, and also, of course, as we are hearing, it also relates a lot to not only value, but really what the history is. And that's that's something that sometimes it's just going to be too murky to dig out, but there it is.
This always boils down to one phrase: pity the poor historian. We can only do what we do. We do the facts. Again, Trev did a tremendous amount of work, and thank you, Trev, for. I know it's morning down there. Again, Trev and I go back a long ways on this, and we appreciate you giving us the patience to put up with this. Bob, anything else?
We have 2 more questions.
Okay. Oh.
Thank you so much for doing this, and I was curious if the logbook extends to any of the French marks, specifically Delahaye is something I've been looking into, and I'm encountering some of the same issues.
Oh. I didn't quite catch all of it, but I didn't catch it.
Essentially, have you done any, is there also French marks that you've been looking into and finding the same thing?
Yeah, there are others who've gone back and replicated this because one of the things we do in Historian, it's different than like Doug. Doug gets a lot of information, he holds it, which is what authors do, what historians do, until it gets published. And I've thrown this information out there some time ago. I set on a lot of information from Barry and another good friend of mine, David McKenzie, who did a lot of work, who helped unknowingly me find the anomalies, because that's what we look for. We look for anomalies, and helped me find some of these anomalies, even though he was not sure what I was looking for at first. So basically, yeah, there are a number of people who come around to this. I think they basically still very quiet about it, exactly what John pointed out. Because then you start looking at Alfa Romeo, you start looking at these other companies as well, Seat, Osaka, and so forth. A lot of them initially did it identity one way, but because of their customer base, they're not stupid. They understand how the system works, and they found that out real quick, that don't confuse people. All Trev and I do is what, Trev? We confuse people because we look at the facts, and we don't worry about the other stuff, thank goodness, because I think Joe would know this, I would make a horrible car dealer. I just tell you what it is, sort of thing. So, anyway, anything else? Oh.
Well, I just have a warning that none of this applies to American race cars up at least through 1980. Numbers for Miller cars have been lost. Frank Curtis and Watson numbered cars, and I have the bill sheets for most of the Offenhauser engines. But they changed engines without making any note at all. If an engine blew up, they put another one in, and so what? Actually, at one year in the 50s, there were more Offenhauser engines entered at Indy than had been built by Meyer and Drake and Offenhauser, because people took blown-up engines and bought some parts and put them together. So you can't run the numbers. You have to look at number of louvers and welds on the chassis to identify them.
And I should give some credit to Gordon, because that was one of the anomalies that I began coming back to, is that this can't be unique. And you look at a lot of American cars, racing cars, dirt track cars, etc. They didn't have an identity except number 52, number 88. I mean, that was basically it. And you're right. When you had pointed out, I said, I'm not insane because Gordon has found the same thing off the engines. And we said we found that some of these engines, when they were broken, they got thrown. Chassis were, like modern. There's a couple of McLarens. There must be like 15 of one chassis number because it's ridiculous. But it is, identity is an open topic. Have at it, as far as I'm concerned. So thank you very much. We appreciate it all. Thank you, Trey, for dialing in this morning.
Thank you, Don and Trevor. We could stay here till midnight, probably. Trevor sent me pages and pages of documentation, which he said pass along to whoever asks for it. So I have a PDF that's, 30, 40 pages long. If you want it, just come up to me tonight at the reception or check with me tomorrow. I'll give you my card, and then you email me that you want it. It's easy as that. All right, folks. That concludes the sessions for today. Tomorrow, Trevor, we're all set?
Yep.
Okay, Trevor, thank you much. That's the end of our day here. I know.
Yeah, and thank everybody in your team, right down to getting the invite to present to you guys.
Okay.
Appreciated it, and thank you very much. Just to finish on there, Bob, I have a friend who looked at what I'd done and he said, "What are you worried about?" He said, "You could call them John, Paul, George, and Ringo. It would make no difference as long as you could track them."
Yeah.
Which I think is Donald's point. There's two different ways of tracking.
Right.
We'll bring them together. So thank you all very much, and see you next time round.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. We're going to close down here for today. You have a nice Saturday.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Yes, I'll mention the books again. Table in the back, Joe Freeman has many of his titles, and Gordon White has many of his titles. So, are you both going to have your books here tomorrow? Okay.
And we're offering discounts.
Oh, very good. That's the magic word. And no sales tax, right? Well, whatever. Whatever.
Sales tax?
Eric's recording this. Yes, there'll be some kind of sales tax. All right, folks. Let's see. One more last thing, I think. Bear with me a moment. I'm sorry we're doing so much trailblazing here. Okay, don't worry about it. Okay, all right. Reception tonight, 6 to 8 at the IMRRC Center. So please head over there. If someone here does not know exactly where that is in Watkins Glen, get with any of us. We'll give you directions or tell you to follow us. So please join us over there, 6 to 8 o'clock. And it's courtesy of the Watkins Glen Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much. Raise your hands back there, the couple. There they are. Thank you very much. All right, folks. That concludes it for today, and we'll see you tomorrow.